In this video, we'll be breaking down 2 hours of the most twisted Family Guy episodes. Let's get started with our first one. Screams of Silence. The story of Brenda Q. In episode Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, Family Guy decided to tackle domestic violence by having Quagmire, Peter, and Joe straight up murder an abuser in the woods. This happened in an episode that feels like someone pitched Very Special Episode meets The Sopranos, and somehow got it greenlit for a Sunday night cartoon slot. The episode aired on October 30th, 2011, and immediately became one of the most controversial installments in the show's history. The whole mess kicks off when Quagmire nearly kills himself during autoerotic asphyxiation while watching clown porn, because of course that's how this episode opens. Peter and Joe discover him hanging in his house, initially thinking he's dead, then rush him to the hospital when they realize he's still breathing. His sister Brenda shows up at the hospital with her boyfriend Jeff, who treats her like a punching bag with feelings. The guys witness Jeff verbally demolishing Brenda in the hospital hallway, forcing her to limp faster because they parked in a handicapped spot. Suddenly, everyone's playing witness to relationship dynamics that belong in a Lifetime movie, except with more cartoon violence and bizarre medical procedures performed outside because the weather's nice. The hospital scene establishes Jeff as cartoonishly terrible. He mocks Brenda's singing voice, makes jokes about her potentially inappropriate relationship with her own brother, and drags her away while she's trying to spend time with her hospitalized sibling. The show lays it on thick, making sure viewers understand this guy represents the worst kind of partner. Peter and Lois hear screaming through the walls that night, with Jeff berating Brenda about getting a night shift at the prison and needing money for motor oil and wallet chains, because abusive boyfriends in 2011 apparently had very specific accessory requirements. Quagmire asks Lois to talk some sense into Brenda, woman-to-woman style, because apparently having a uterus makes you the domestic abuse whisperer. Lois takes Brenda to lunch, where Brenda shows up wearing sunglasses to hide a black eye. She defends Jeff's behavior with the kind of logic that makes your brain hurt, claiming he's gentle and soft when he hits her in private, and blaming his anger on immigrants rather than his fundamental character flaws. The whole conversation plays out like watching someone try to explain why stepping on Legos is actually pleasant. When the waiter approaches, Brenda gets flustered about closing her menu at the right time, apologizing and saying this proves why Jeff needs to correct her constantly. The gaslighting has worked so thoroughly that she blames herself for everything. Lois arranges an intervention at the Griffin house, gathering everyone who cares about Brenda to confront the situation. The intervention goes about as well as you'd expect when you let a Family Guy cast run one. Meg suggests that maybe Brenda can change Jeff if he likes her enough. Truly groundbreaking relationship advice there. Peter's contribution involves sarcastically asking if she likes getting beaten, while forcing her to smoke an entire carton of cigarettes. Galaxy brain move there, Peter. Chris gets called Caleb by his own father, revealing Peter doesn't actually know his name. Quagmire reads this heartfelt letter about wanting his sister back, describing how the vibrant woman he grew up with has become just a punching bag who's chosen to make her life worse. The letter lands emotionally, seeming to break through Brenda's defenses. Just when you think Brenda might actually leave, Jeff bursts in demanding money for a bandana he spotted. Brenda announces she's marrying Jeff instead of leaving him. Plot twist, she's pregnant. Peter immediately suggests naming the kid Slappy, Bruisey, or Keep It Down in There Sigh, which lands somewhere between dark comedy and Sir, please read the room. The joke reveals how the show struggles to balance genuine drama with its signature inappropriate humor. You can't treat domestic violence seriously while simultaneously riffing baby name jokes about the abuse. The guys initially debate what to do, with Joe explaining that police policy prevents intervention until someone actually dies, a depressing reality that the episode highlights. Everything changes when they hear Jeff slapping Brenda through the walls while arguing about Jay Leno versus David Letterman. Imagine getting beaten over late-night talk show preferences. Even Joe, the cop, says screw police policy, they're doing this murder thing. The episode crosses from concerned friends to premeditated homicide faster than you can say legal consequences. They invite Jeff on a hunting trip that's really just premeditated homicide with extra steps. The plan involves shooting him in the woods and calling it a tragic accident. The whole scheme goes sideways when Jeff figures out what's happening during a bathroom break and holds them at gunpoint instead. Jeff mocks Quagmire for bringing backup to do his dirty work, then announces he's taking Quagmire on a ride while leaving Peter and Joe to freeze. Quagmire challenges Jeff to a fistfight, appealing to his ego by suggesting he's scared. Jeff accepts, beats Quagmire thoroughly in hand-to-hand combat, then gets run over by his own truck when Quagmire circles back vehicle style. The irony of settling it like men, ending with vehicular manslaughter, adds another layer to this already messy resolution. The guys forge a breakup letter from Jeff that reads like it was written by someone who learned English from WikiHow articles. The forgery claims Jeff realized Brenda deserved better, includes threats about what happens if she talks to police, insults calling her garbage, and somehow references Grape Ape because Peter couldn't resist adding cartoon nostalgia to a fake suicide note. Brenda accepts the letter at face value, crying over her abuser's departure while three guys stand there having just committed felony murder. Joe, the police officer, literally participated in killing someone and covering it up, which feels like the kind of career decision that should come with some paperwork. This episode sparked massive controversy for trying to blend serious domestic violence PSA energy with Family Guy's usual everything is a joke approach. The show essentially argues that murdering abusers solves the problem while providing alibis for your friends. Critics pointed out the impossibly mixed messaging. You can't do a serious domestic abuse storyline while also maintaining the show's irreverent comedy style. The episode wanted to be both meaningful and darkly funny, landing somewhere in the uncanny valley between after-school special and crime procedural. Family Guy tried to have their cake and beat it too. Now let's move on to the next episode, and this one's pretty wild. Seahorse Seashell Party. In episode Seahorse Seashell Party, Family Guy decided to give us a 2-for-1 special. Brian's nightmare mushroom trip paired with Meg finally having a mental breakdown and roasting her entire family like a Comedy Central special. The episode aired on October 2nd, 2011, during a hurricane lockdown that forced the Griffins to actually interact with each other, the horror. The setup kicks off with Hurricane Flozell bearing down on Quahog, forcing everyone indoors for at least 36 hours. The satellite dish gets knocked out immediately, leaving the family with zero entertainment options beyond staring at each other's faces. Peter tries to lead a charades game where he keeps talking through the entire thing, defeating the purpose of charades entirely, classic Peter energy. The boredom reaches critical mass when Peter decides to entertain everyone by making various dad noises for several minutes, coughing, throat clearing, grunting, the whole symphony of middle-aged man sounds. This jotting bonding experience sets the stage for everything falling apart. Brian decides the hurricane represents the perfect opportunity to eat psychedelic mushrooms because apparently being trapped in a house during a natural disaster screams ideal drug experience. Stewie discovers Brian's plan and overcompensates with the "I'm totally cool with drugs" speech that immediately reveals he's never been cool with drugs in his life. The mushrooms hit Brian like a freight train made of nightmares, sending him into a hellscape of hallucinations that would make Hieronymus Bosch say, maybe dial it back a bit. Stewie spends the entire trip babysitting Brian through visions of demon babies, grotesque family members, and various creatures that look like they escaped from a fever dream designed by someone who hates sleep. The main family drama unfolds when Peter starts humming the Indiana Jones theme music and Meg snaps at him for being annoying. This tiny moment becomes the match that lights the powder keg, because Meg has apparently been storing up 17 years of grievances, and she's ready to unload them all at once. She goes full scorched earth mode on Chris first, calling him out for being a terrible brother who constantly joins the family dogpile on her. Chris gets the verbal equivalent of a 2x4 to the face when Meg points out how he treats her like garbage despite being her sibling. The callback to Chris calling her names hits different when Meg fires back by describing him as a fat, zitty loser who smells like an old woman with pet birds. Apply ice directly to burn area. Lois becomes the next target when she tries to shut down Meg's rant. Meg absolutely demolishes her mother by bringing up every questionable life choice Lois ever made. The shoplifting, the drug addiction, the porn career, the affairs with Gene Simmons and Bill Clinton, which sounds like the world's weirdest bingo card. The real gut punch comes when Meg explains how Lois failed at the basic job of motherhood, protecting and guiding a vulnerable child. Meg describes her relationship with Lois as a 17-year mission to destroy whatever trust existed between them. The speech lands so hard that Lois immediately starts crying and apologizing, admitting she's been a terrible mother who constantly points out Meg's flaws to distract from her own parenting failures. Peter gets his turn in the metaphorical blast furnace when Meg calls him a fat, lazy, abusive, blue-collar Irish Catholic dad who drinks too much and barely supports his family. She points out that his only accomplishments are his kids, and they're all disasters, brutal but fair assessment. The roast reaches peak intensity when Meg tells Peter he's lived half his life with nothing to show for it except being a complete embarrassment in every possible way. She calls him a waste of a man, which finally makes Peter realize these are actual criticisms rather than compliments delivered in a confusing order. The family completely implodes after Meg's intervention. Lois and Chris start fighting about cooking and laundry. Chris complains about never getting good food while Lois fires back about literally emptying farts out of his pockets when she does laundry. That's a sentence that exists now. Peter storms off to hide in the closet with the shoes, claiming he doesn't deserve better. The entire Griffin household transforms into a tornado of dysfunction, where everyone attacks everyone else. The carefully maintained family structure collapses faster than a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Brian finds Meg outside contemplating what she's unleashed. She theorizes that maybe the family needs her as a lightning rod to absorb all their dysfunction. If everyone focuses their negativity on Meg, they don't have to confront their own issues or turn on each other. Brian calls this incredibly noble and mature, recognizing that Meg might actually be the strongest person in the house. The episode takes a dark turn when Meg decides to take everything back, apologizing to her entire family and accepting blame for their behavior. She tells Lois she's an amazing mother, calls Chris an outstanding brother, and apologizes to Peter for making him feel bad. The family immediately accepts this narrative because it's easier than actual self-reflection. The ending undermines everything Meg said by having her return to her role as family punching bag. The show basically argues that some families need a designated target to function, which feels less like social commentary and more like the writers explaining why they keep dunking on Meg every episode. The episode wanted to give Meg a moment of empowerment while also maintaining the status quo, resulting in a message that lands somewhere between speak your truth and actually maybe don't because everything will fall apart. Family Guy tried to have their emotional breakthrough and eat it too, with extra suffering on the side. Now let's move on to the next episode, and it gets even better. Brian and Stewie. In episode Brian and Stewie, Family Guy decided to lock two characters in a bank vault for an entire weekend and see what happens when you remove all the usual distractions. The answer involves eating feces, piercing ears while drunk, and a surprise revelation about suicide. The episode aired on May 2nd, 2010, as an extended special that felt like watching an experimental theater piece, except with more bodily functions. The whole situation kicks off when Brian takes Stewie to the bank so he can access his safety deposit box. Brian keeps expensive items in there like a $3,000 Tom Brown sweater he's planning to return and a first edition copy of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, the author. Not the magician who makes things disappear, though that skill would come in handy later. The two bicker about the sweater purchase, with Brian calling Stewie pretentious for spending that kind of money. Stewie gets defensive about finally splurging on himself, setting the tone for their relationship dynamics throughout the episode. They finish up at the bank right as the vault doors automatically close for the weekend, trapping them inside until Monday morning. Stewie immediately craps his diaper from fear, because apparently that's his body's natural response to stressful situations. The diaper situation becomes the first major crisis. Stewie explains he'll get a rash and potential infection if he stays in a dirty diaper until Monday. Brian offers to just take the diaper off, which solves exactly zero problems since they'd still have the smell issue, and Stewie would be walking around with his equipment exposed. Stewie proposes a solution that makes Brian question every life choice that led to this moment. Brian needs to eat the contents of the diaper, lick it clean, lick Stewie's backside, and put the diaper back on. The proposal gets delivered with the kind of casual, matter-of-fact energy usually reserved for discussing lunch plans. Brian reacts exactly how you'd expect someone to react when asked to consume another being's waste products. Spoiler, he says no initially. Stewie pulls out a gun from Brian's safety deposit box to threaten him, which reveals Brian keeps a firearm despite all his liberal political stances. They argue about whether the gun has bullets while Stewie holds it sideways, like a black guy. The show really went there. Brian eventually agrees to the diaper arrangement because he can't stand seeing Stewie suffer. The actual scene plays out in excruciating detail, with Brian gagging and vomiting, then being forced to eat the vomit because dogs supposedly like throw up. The whole sequence feels like the writers asked themselves what's the absolute worst thing we could show on television, and then animated it frame by frame. Brian completes the task and gets the clean diaper back on Stewie, officially crossing a friendship boundary that can never be uncrossed. They discover Stewie's cell phone, but he wastes the battery calling the store to ask about extending the return window on his sweater. This might be the most Stewie thing possible, prioritizing a $3,000 refund over actual rescue. Brian snaps at Stewie for the wasted call, hurting his feelings enough that Brian agrees to the whole diaper situation as an apology. After everything settles down, they find Jenny Craig bars that Stewie had the entire time, proving he was never actually in danger of starving. They drink Brian's bottle of scotch, Glenfiddich, for those keeping track of expensive alcohol choices. Stewie gets drunk on liquor for the first time, feeling like a big boy and bonding with Brian over shared intoxication. The pierced ear incident happens when drunk Stewie decides he wants an earring immediately. Brian sterilizes a pin from the sweater in scotch and attempts the piercing, which goes about as well as amateur body modification performed by drunk people typically goes. There's excessive blood, the pin gets stuck, and Stewie ends up with a hole in his ear that probably needed actual professional attention. They continue drinking and discussing dog psychology, specifically whether Brian truly lives with purpose, like Cesar Millan talks about on The Dog Whisperer. The conversation turns ugly when they start attacking each other's character flaws. Stewie drops the bomb that he manipulated Brian into eating the diaper contents just to see if he could. The whole medical necessity angle was fabricated. Stewie spends half his days in dirty diapers anyway. He wanted to test how low he could get Brian to go, which retroactively makes the entire diaper scene even more disturbing. Brian threatens to shoot Stewie before realizing everything got captured on the security camera. The thought of dog baby Haney lick going viral on YouTube and becoming water cooler conversation horrifies Brian more than the actual act did. Their fight ends with both apologizing. Brian explains why he keeps the gun. He considers it his suicide option for when life becomes too unbearable. Dogs should instinctively live with purpose according to breed standards, but Brian feels he lacks that natural ability. He can't find meaning in his existence and keeps the scotch as his planned final drink before pulling the trigger. The revelation shifts the entire episode from dark comedy into genuinely heavy territory. Stewie tells Brian that he gives his life purpose and that he's the only friend who matters. They exchange genuine declarations of love, the platonic kind, before anyone gets weird ideas. Brian admits Stewie gives his life meaning, which might be enough reason to keep going. The episode ends with them snuggled together while Brian reads David Copperfield aloud. The bank vault opens on Monday morning, freeing them back into the world. The whole experience served as this bizarre bonding ritual that forced both characters to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their relationship. Family Guy created a bottle episode that oscillated between gross-out humor and existential crisis without much middle ground. The show proved it could do character-driven drama while still maintaining its signature inappropriate comedy, even if that meant crossing lines most animated series wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. Now let's move on to the next episode, and trust me, it's a weird one. Quagmire's Dad. In episode Quagmire's Dad, Family Guy decided to tackle transgender identity by having Quagmire's military hero father transition into a woman, then immediately pairing her with Brian for a hookup that ends in vomiting and violence. The episode aired on May 9th, 2010, and became one of the show's most controversial installments for reasons that probably don't need extensive explanation. The setup begins with Brian heading off to a seminar about creating web-based internet series, very 2010 energy. The family treats his departure with complete indifference, casually saying goodbye like he's walking to the store rather than leaving for days. Peter and Lois are fully prepared for Brian to eventually wander into the woods and die because he's a dog, which feels like the kind of existential observation that should require more processing time. Brian leaves feeling underappreciated, setting up his emotional vulnerability for later disaster. Quagmire announces his father Dan is visiting for the naval ball, where the military plans to honor his Vietnam service. Dan Quagmire enters the Griffin house by dancing to Nancy Sinatra, while Quagmire hypes him up like a UFC fighter entering the octagon. Dan presents as this stereotypical military tough guy who immediately orders a Cosmopolitan, which becomes the first of many clues everyone misses. Peter notices something feels off about Dan's mannerisms, the way he talks, and his obsession with not sweating because he hates to perspire. The obvious conclusion Peter reaches: Dan must be gay. Peter tries explaining his theory to Lois using evidence like Dan's DVD collection and general demeanor. Lois suggests Peter talk to Quagmire about it, leading to an awkward conversation where Quagmire completely refuses to see what Peter's pointing out. Quagmire remains in aggressive denial, insisting his father is a legendary ladies' man and accusing Peter of jealousy because his own father is a drunk. The setup plays like watching someone miss increasingly obvious hints while everyone else can see the truth. The audience gets to feel smart for approximately 5 minutes before the rug gets pulled. At the naval ball, every military colleague makes double entendre comments about Dan that could be interpreted multiple ways. References to loads, privates, and other military terminology get delivered with zero self-awareness, while Peter keeps making faces. Quagmire finally confronts his father directly, demanding to know if he's gay. Dan denies being gay, then immediately reveals he's actually a woman trapped in a man's body and plans to have gender confirmation surgery while visiting Quahog. The distinction between being gay versus being transgender gets played for confusion, with Peter and Joe both calling it gay, while Quagmire insists it's completely different. The show treats the revelation like a punchline rather than a character moment. Dan transitions to Ida through surgery with Dr. Hartman, because of course the town's most incompetent doctor handles this procedure. The post-surgery reveal plays out like a makeover show, complete with music and celebration. Ida emerges happy and confident, while Quagmire struggles to process having a parent who transitioned. The family dinner at the Griffin house becomes peak awkwardness when Peter asks invasive questions about the surgical details. Ida explains they inverted the existing anatomy to create female anatomy, which Peter finds fascinating in the worst possible way. Quagmire storms out, unable to handle watching his father bond with Lois over clothes shopping and home decor. Meanwhile, Brian returns from his seminar, feeling energized and excited about new opportunities. He stops at the hotel bar for a drink, where he meets an attractive woman who seems interested in his writing aspirations. They connect over shared interests. Brian feels like he's found a genuine intellectual equal, and they end up sleeping together. Brian takes a photo of his new romantic interest, feeling like he's finally found the whole package. The irony of this phrase lands differently once the truth comes out. He returns home glowing with happiness, eager to share his good news with a family that continues not caring about his life. The revelation happens when Brian shows everyone the photo of his date. Peter and Lois immediately recognize Ida and dissolve into hysterical laughter that goes on for an uncomfortable amount of time. Brian insists he found a real woman, which only makes Peter and Lois laugh harder because technically, he did find a real woman, just one who transitioned. Stewie later mentions Quagmire's dad's transition in casual conversation, and Brian pieces together that his romantic connection was with Ida. The realization triggers an extended vomiting sequence that plays out like a horror movie reaction rather than someone processing unexpected information. Brian's reaction sparks controversy because the show treats sleeping with a transgender woman as the ultimate humiliation rather than just an awkward situation. The excessive gagging suggests disgust rather than surprise, which lands differently than probably intended. Quagmire reconciles with Ida, accepting her happiness as more important than his discomfort. Then Ida mentions meeting someone special, and Quagmire immediately realizes it's Brian. The episode ends with Quagmire violently beating Brian while screaming threats, then delivering the final line about the situation with maximum venom. The episode wanted to tackle transgender identity while maintaining Family Guy's irreverent comedy style, but the execution undermines any progressive messaging. Brian's horror at sleeping with a trans woman and Quagmire's violent response both suggest the show views the situation as inherently shameful rather than just personally awkward for the characters involved. The episode sparked significant backlash from LGBTQ+ advocates who pointed out the harmful stereotypes and negative framing throughout. Family Guy tried to have their inclusive moment and mock it simultaneously, creating something that satisfied basically nobody. The show treated a serious identity journey as setup for a gross-out punchline, which feels like missing the assignment on multiple levels. Now, let's move on to the next episode, and you're gonna like this twist. And if you're enjoying the video so far, subscribe to our channel. Stewie kills Lois, Lois kills Stewie. In episodes Stewie kills Lois and Lois kills Stewie, Family Guy decided to stretch a murder fantasy across 2 parts like they were making a prestige drama instead of an animated comedy about a talking baby. The first part aired on November 4th, 2007, with the second part following a week later, creating a cliffhanger that had viewers wondering if the show actually killed off Lois permanently. Spoiler: they didn't, because maintaining the status quo is more profitable than character consequences. The whole mess kicks off during Lois's birthday celebration when Brian gives her tickets for a cruise. The family gives terrible gifts like Smoker's tooth polish and a Lionel Richie album, making Brian's cruise tickets look generous by comparison. Peter gets angry because they agreed on a $20 spending limit and Brian just made everyone else look cheap. The real kicker comes when Lois assumes the tickets mean she's going on vacation with Brian, while Peter assumed he'd be the one joining his wife. Brian clarifies that Peter gets to accompany Lois, turning his generous gift into Peter's vacation, which feels less like a present and more like a logistical nightmare waiting to happen. Stewie discovers he's being left behind after Peter and Lois already boarded the ship. The realization hits him like discovering the last season of your favorite show got canceled, devastating, and too late to change anything. Stewie watches from the dock as his parents sail away without him, triggering abandonment issues that manifest as elaborate murder fantasies. He compares his disappointment to watching The Lake House, which apparently confused him deeply with its time-traveling mailbox premise, relatable content for anyone who tried following that movie's logic. The cruise itself plays out like a series of Peter making terrible decisions. He gets banned from the aft section after using the poop deck for its literal interpretation rather than its nautical meaning. During the captain's dinner, Peter tells an incredibly inappropriate story about driving to Vermont for an abortion that got canceled because the doctor only had one hand, which resulted in Meg being born. Lois becomes mortified by Peter's behavior, feeling unable to show her face around the ship after the abortion story ruins dinner with the captain. Their marriage tension reaches peak levels when they argue about Peter, completely embarrassing her in front of everyone. Stewie appears in their cabin with a gun, explaining that Lois drove him to this moment with years of tyranny and indignity. He shoots her, claiming victory over the woman who controlled his life. The episode cuts to 6 days later with Lois officially missing and presumed dead from the cruise ship. Joe eventually calls off the search, forcing Peter to accept that his wife is gone. The show jumps forward an entire year to explore what life looks like without Lois, which turns out surprisingly functional for everyone, except Chris, who believes his mom is at a health spa and then traveling Europe. Peter starts dating again with disastrous results. He goes out with someone who clarified her profile, said she has cancer rather than being a Cancer zodiac sign. Another date involves a literal stick figure who offers something called a stick job that sounds deeply unpleasant. The most awkward encounter happens when Bonnie propositions Peter, insisting Joe gave permission for them to hook up, which raises more questions than it answers about the Swanson marriage dynamics. Brian discovers evidence suggesting Stewie committed the murder, specifically a speedboat rental receipt from the night Lois disappeared. Stewie claims he was at a carnival with Rupert, providing an alibi that sounds suspiciously convenient. When Brian confronts him directly about killing Lois, Stewie initially denies everything before accidentally admitting the truth. Brian vows to expose Stewie no matter what it takes, setting up a detective storyline within the murder plot. Meanwhile, Joe and Quagmire grow suspicious of Peter after discovering he took out a life insurance policy on Lois right before the cruise. Peter collects the payout and starts spending money freely, which looks incredibly incriminating from the outside. Joe finds what appears to be Peter's handwriting on evidence, suggesting he planned the murder. The investigation shifts focus entirely to Peter, letting Stewie off the hook, while the actual killer watches everything unfold. Peter goes to trial for murdering his wife. The prosecution presents devastating evidence, including Carter's testimony and simulation, Chris accidentally mentioning Peter killed Pat Tillman during military service, in an extended flashback that somehow makes friendly fire seem like the world's worst game of telephone, and Peter's own testimony about drinking heavily and asserting dominance through violence. The jury finds Peter guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing him to life imprisonment. The courtroom descends into chaos with everyone saying "oh no" repeatedly, until the judge begs them to stop because it keeps summoning the Kool-Aid Man, a meta-joke that acknowledges how stupid courtroom drama tropes can be. Just as the judge delivers the life sentence, Lois walks into the courtroom alive. She survives Stewie's attack and reveals he was the one who tried to kill her, completely exonerating Peter while exposing Stewie's crime. The cliffhanger ending promises a second part where presumably Lois hunts down Stewie for attempted matricide. The two-parter format allowed Family Guy to explore what the show would look like without its matriarch, while ultimately maintaining the status quo. The show wanted to have its murder mystery and reset it too, creating stakes that felt temporary from the moment they introduced them. Family Guy proved it could do serialized storytelling while also demonstrating exactly why it typically doesn't bother. Now let's move on to the next episode, and things get messy here. And then there were fewer. In episode And Then There Were Fewer, Family Guy decided to make an hour-long murder mystery special that killed off actual characters permanently, which feels like the animated equivalent of a show suddenly remembering it has stakes. The episode aired on September 26, 2010, as the Season 9 premiere, turning what's usually a consequence-free cartoon into an Agatha Christie homage with body counts and genuine suspense. The setup begins when everyone in Quahog receives mysterious invitations to a weekend dinner party at Rocky Point Manor. Each invitation claims the dinner honors that specific person, which immediately triggers everyone's ego enough to show up. Peter assumes he's being honored for existing. Joe thinks it's for his police work, and Tom Tucker believes people want to celebrate his ability to fart the alphabet. He made it to the letter S before pooping himself on a bus, traumatizing fellow passengers who were already upset for unrelated reasons. The reveal that James Woods orchestrated the whole gathering lands like discovering your surprise party was thrown by someone who previously stole your identity. James Woods explains his born-again Christian transformation through his relationship with Priscilla, claiming he wants to make amends for wronging everyone present. The speech comes across as sincere until you remember this is James Woods, a character whose entire personality revolves around being terrible. Nobody trusts him, which makes total sense given his history of terrorizing the Griffin family and basically everyone else in town. The dinner party vibe shifts from suspicious to horrifying when a hidden gun fires during dinner, hitting Stephanie Quagmire's date instead of James Woods, who left his chair moments earlier. She dies from the gunshot, immediately confirming this weekend getaway has taken a dark turn. Everyone tries fleeing, but discovers a massive storm destroyed the bridge and flooded the causeway. They're trapped on the property with zero cell reception and a dead phone line, creating the perfect locked room mystery scenario. Peter tries reversing the car but manages to run over Joe in the process, injuring him badly enough that he spends chunks of the episode unconscious, which becomes important later for elimination purposes. The group returns inside to find Stephanie's body missing, raising questions about whether she actually died. James Woods denies killing anyone, pointing out that murdering people would jeopardize his entrance to heaven, solid theological logic from a suspected killer. The lights go out during the confrontation. When they come back on, James Woods lies dead with a knife in his chest. The revelation flips the entire investigation. James Woods wasn't the killer. He was always the intended victim. The hidden gun was timed to shoot whoever sat in his chair, making Stephanie's death an accident caused by wrong place, wrong time, circumstances. Someone at the party wanted James Woods dead badly enough to orchestrate an elaborate murder plot disguised as a reconciliation dinner. The investigation kicks into high gear with Peter taking charge despite having zero detective skills. Everyone becomes a suspect because James Woods wronged literally everybody present. Tom Tucker lost his acting career after James convinced him to turn down the Nightmare on Elm Street role that made Robert Englund famous. Seamus got his limbs eaten when James thought he was a steak during an acid trip. The mayor hates him for stealing the Twitter handle Mayor West. Consuela's nephew got molested and committed suicide. The list goes on, creating approximately 15 people with legitimate murder motives gathered in one house during a storm. Muriel Goldman emerges as the prime suspect after they discover James Woods blackmailed her into illegally selling him OxyContin prescriptions. She threatens to call her lawyer while wearing shorts, which Brian finds more disturbing than the actual murder accusations. His obsession with people noticing his shorts becomes a running gag throughout the crisis. Before anyone can properly interrogate Muriel, she disappears during another investigation montage. They find her stabbed to death with the same knife that killed James Woods, eliminating her as the killer and creating more confusion about who's actually responsible. Derek dies next after climbing to the roof to get cell phone reception. Someone bludgeons him with James Woods' Golden Globe Award before pushing him off, staging it to look like an accident. Tom Tucker becomes the main suspect when they find the murder weapon hidden under his bed. He runs from the group in a chase sequence that somehow stumps everyone until Peter suggests the revolutionary tactic of splitting up and going around both sides of the table simultaneously. They capture Tom and prepare to turn him over to police once the storm clears. The twist comes when Lois discovers Diane Simmons bought a blouse for her first solo broadcast before any of this happened, revealing she knew Tom would be removed from the equation. Diane admits orchestrating the entire weekend to destroy both James Woods and Tom Tucker. James dumped her after she turned 40, while Tom pushed Channel 5 News to replace her with younger talent. She manipulated Priscilla into dating James and converting him to Christianity, setting up the reconciliation dinner as cover for her revenge plot. Diane killed everyone who got in her way, Stephanie by accident, James Woods as planned, Priscilla to keep her quiet, Muriel who caught her planting evidence, and Derek who tried calling police too soon. Diane prepares to shoot Lois to eliminate the final witness. A gunshot rings out, but Stephanie returns to save Lois by shooting Diane instead, explaining where the missing body went and who actually survived. The episode permanently removed multiple characters from the show's roster, proving Family Guy could commit to consequences when it felt like flexing dramatic muscles. The mystery worked because everyone genuinely had motives, the deaths stuck, and the show took itself seriously for once while still maintaining its signature dark humor throughout the investigation. Now let's move on to the next episode, and this one goes in a crazy direction. Fresh Air. In episode Fresh Air, Family Guy decided Peter should try to marry his own son for inheritance money, which feels like the writers asked themselves what boundary they hadn't crossed yet and landed on legally binding incestuous marriage in Vermont. The episode aired on March 23, 2014, proving the show had officially run out of normal family drama plots and decided to pivot hard into territory that makes Thanksgiving dinners awkward. The whole situation kicks off when Chris tries getting quality time with Peter, who'd rather watch television or practice being insane, which involves yelling about pinwheels and angry fish, like that's a normal hobby. Peter promises they'll go fishing someday, then immediately admits he was lying just to make Chris leave. He offers Chris $1 billion to go away right now, and Chris takes the deal because apparently he inherited Peter's intelligence genes. Lois suggests Peter should bond with his son, but Peter only forms unspoken bonds, the kind where you silently turn up Pat Benatar in the car and never discuss feelings like emotionally healthy people do. Carter Pewterschmidt breaks his leg at the mall after throwing a tantrum about corduroys versus dungarees. Imagine being a wealthy patriarch having a meltdown over pants terminology in public. Lois can't help because she's getting her hair minutely changed and needs 14 hours for people to notice. Peter won't help because he's busy watching television and confessing that Amy from work kissed him, but he didn't lean in, though he admits she did recently change her hairstyle, which apparently explains everything. Chris volunteers to care for his grandfather, mostly because Peter forgot he existed and nobody else wanted the job. Chris discovers Carter lying in bed bored out of his mind, unable to sleep or have relations with anyone. Carter wishes he could handle certain needs himself to completion within 4 minutes, which leads to Chris teaching his grandfather about self-pleasure, a sentence that shouldn't exist. But here we are. Carter's mind gets blown by the revelation that you can basically do this whenever you're not doing something else, like it's the greatest discovery since fire. They bond over ordering pizza online and tracking delivery drivers like it's competitive racing, treating the delivery person like a clown who has to eat money out of mashed potatoes without using hands. The grandfather-grandson relationship blossoms into genuine friendship. They start a band together, rehearsing songs about Hall's mentholyptus, cough drops, and falling in showers. Carter gets so impressed by Chris's refreshingly positive attitude, like when Chris makes his elbow look like female anatomy, and Carter finds it delightfully fresh that he decides to change his will. Carter announces at dinner that he's naming Chris the sole heir to the entire Pewterschmidt fortune, cutting everyone else out completely. The hairless twin escapes during the announcement and gets shot, then shows up at dinner, wanting to eat garbage with the family. Side plots in this show really go places. Peter realizes his master plan of retiring at 45 to research Alzheimer's disease, a condition where men forget where their testicles are, just got torpedoed. He'd been counting on that inheritance money as a critical component of his future, which says interesting things about his life planning skills. Peter decides the solution involves brown-nosing Chris immediately, though he struggles with whether perk is the right word to describe the money situation. Lois points out this seems ethically questionable, but Peter's already committed to the bit. The sucking up campaign involves Peter dressing like what he thinks cool people wear, creating an impossibly complicated secret handshake with approximately 30 steps, and bringing Chris the severed head of a bully, except it's actually the deaf kid, because Peter mistook sign language for terrible karate. Peter tries showing Chris the classic comedy meatballs, which goes nowhere because flat chests and slowly sinking canoes don't hold up against a generation raised on Miley Cyrus doing controversial things with foam fingers at 6 p.m. Central Time. Peter even cleans Chris's room, discovering something so disturbing that he and Lois agree to never speak of it again, and Peter considers moving. The show really commits to implying the worst without showing anything. The breakthrough comes when Quagmire mentions Chris will eventually marry some lucky person. Peter realizes he could become that lucky person, solving the inheritance problem through matrimony. He proposes to Chris, arguing it's legal in Vermont where liberal degenerates allow anything as long as it's man and man. Chris initially finds it weird until Peter explains they'd be like best pals who spend time together doing activities, which Chris desperately wants. Chris accepts, agreeing to marry his father in exchange for quality time and fishing trips. The wedding planning montage plays out like any other ceremony: preparation, meeting with DJs, florists, and brunch coordinators who specialize in seating awkward post-wedding guests. Peter gives Chris a ring that used to belong to Lois, revealing he divorced her via paperwork she signed while half asleep. They register for $9,000 copper cookware despite never cooking, which the sales associate confirms is exactly what their business model expects. The ceremony happens on a Thursday, so Chris can skip school, finally finding the silver lining in child marriage. Lois crashes the wedding after multiple people report a man marrying his son to authorities, explaining this qualifies as abnormal behavior. Chris reveals he knew about Peter's financial motivations all along, but agreed anyway because planning the wedding meant more father-son time than they'd ever shared. The confession makes Peter realize he's been a jerk, leading him to propose becoming Chris's father instead of husband, a significantly healthier relationship dynamic. The episode ends with everyone going home, Peter noting he learned it's wrong to take your son to Vermont under false pretenses to marry him for inheritance. The show throws in a Woody Allen reference about him also marrying one of his children, which really drives home how completely unhinged this entire premise was from start to finish. Now, let's move on to the next episode. And it gets really interesting from here. Life of Brian. In episode Life of Brian, Family Guy decided to kill off one of its main characters permanently. Just kidding, it lasted 2 episodes, which felt like the animated equivalent of a show going through a midlife crisis and making rash decisions. The episode aired on November 24th, 2013, creating genuine fan outrage and launching approximately 7,000 online petitions to bring back a cartoon dog, because apparently we live in a society where fictional animal deaths trigger more activism than actual problems. The setup begins with Stewie and Brian escaping from Native Americans with guns in an alternate timeline where the Indians run everything. Stewie accidentally gave firearms to 17th century Jamestown colonists' indigenous neighbors, creating a reality where America got taken over and white people became the oppressed minority. The show really went for that premise with both hands. The alternate universe features Native American medical care, shops everywhere, and a #1 song called Hooya 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 that's held the top spot for 10,000 weeks straight. Their return pad takes bullets during the escape, forcing them to find the alternate universe Stewie's time machine to fix everything. They successfully restore the original timeline by retrieving the guns from the Native Americans before everything goes sideways. Stewie decides the time machine has nearly killed them approximately 100 times, making yesterday's close call the final straw. He destroys his crowning achievement with a sledgehammer, explaining he'd rather eliminate the risk before something irreparable happens. Brian seems shocked that Stewie would destroy something so significant, but Stewie insists it's for the best. He mentions time traveling ahead to Christmas to skip the wait for new toys, casually revealing he's been using advanced physics to satisfy impatience, very on brand for a baby genius. The duo discovers a street hockey net at the dump, deciding to take up outdoor activities now that Stewie no longer has his time-consuming invention. They set up the net in front of the house, enjoying quality time together while getting fresh air and exercise. Stewie goes inside to grab his knee pads, mentioning he was using them for some other unspecified thing. The show loves implying scenarios without confirming them. While Stewie's gone, a car speeds down the street. Brian doesn't notice until Stewie screams a warning, then gets struck by the vehicle in front of his best friend. The family rushes Brian to Quahog's best veterinarian, though he has to share the ambulance with a chicken who refuses conversation because Peter has a bad reputation in the poultry community. The doctor delivers devastating news. Brian's injuries are too severe to save him. The family gathers around his bed for final goodbyes. Peter breaks down, explaining they were supposed to do so many things together, including becoming windsurfers where Peter would be slightly better, but they'd both be good. Brian manages to tell everyone they gave him a wonderful life before the monitor flatlines. Chris announces he needs alone time upstairs for a sad personal moment, which really captures how different people process grief. Stewie realizes he can rebuild the time machine to prevent Brian's death, rushing to contact his friend Yusuf about titanium capacitors. Yusuf explains the only manufacturer drew a doodle of Muhammad while absent-mindedly talking on the phone, and subsequently isn't around anymore. The show tackles religious extremism through throwaway dark comedy. Without the capacitors, building a functioning time machine becomes impossible. Stewie accepts that Brian is genuinely gone forever, breaking down while holding Rupert. Brian's funeral brings together the community. Joe mentions he usually skips funerals because as a cop he always gets hit by a black woman with a purse, demanding justice, a recurring bit that somehow keeps landing. Peter delivers a eulogy explaining Brian, his best friend, and basically a brother. The speech lands emotionally until the show undercuts it with Ortiz baseball jokes, and Peter almost serving Brian dinner a month later because he forgot dogs don't eat at tables. Lois suggests getting a new dog to help everyone move on. They visit a shelter where they meet Vinny, a talking dog with a thick New Jersey accent, who introduces himself as a pussy hound before clarifying he's 1/16th cat, a detail Peter immediately regrets learning. Vinny offers to cook dinner for Lois, bonds with Chris by giving him the nickname Hat Boy, and generally integrates into family life faster than most characters manage. Stewie initially hates Vinny for replacing Brian, attempting to give him fatal news about Italian-American tragedies until Chris counters with good news that saves the plan. The breaking point comes when Vinny finds Stewie crying. Stewie admits everyone forgot about Brian while celebrating the new dog. Vinny shares his own lost story about Leo, his previous owner who died attempting yoga when his anatomy catastrophically failed. It made Dateline, apparently becoming a whole thing. The parallel experiences create genuine connection. Vinny explains finding the Griffins felt like fate, bringing together people experiencing similar loss. Stewie accepts Vinny as Brian's successor, finally moving past his grief. The episode sparked massive backlash from fans who believed Family Guy permanently killed Brian. The show brought him back 2 episodes later via time travel, revealing the whole death was temporary. Family Guy proved it could generate genuine emotion, while also demonstrating exactly why killing main characters rarely sticks in comedies. The show wanted viewers to feel loss without actually committing to consequences, creating emotional manipulation disguised as character development. Now, let's move on to the next episode, and you won't expect what happens. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Stewie is enceinte. In episode Stewie is enceinte, Family Guy decided Stewie should impregnate himself with Brian's DNA and give birth to deformed human-dog hybrids, which feels like the writers played Mad Libs with things that should never happen on television and actually animated the results. The episode aired on February 15, 2015, proving the show had officially abandoned any remaining boundaries regarding biological horror and appropriate baby-related content. The setup begins with Stewie noticing Brian acting distant lately. They used to be inseparable like Jack and Jill, except their friendship story involves finding swallowed teeth in feces rather than tumbling down hills together. Stewie really needs better comparison points. Brian keeps making excuses about having plans or dates, leaving Stewie feeling abandoned and desperate for quality time. The rejection hits hard enough that Stewie starts overthinking everything, wondering if he seemed too desperate when suggesting gluten-free pizza together. Meanwhile, Peter and the guys decide to create a viral internet video after watching Opera Penguin rack up 7 million views. They brainstorm ingredients for viral success cats, people reacting to gross content, and preferably something involving Joe doing 30 impressions in 30 seconds with the exact same voice for each one. The subplot runs parallel to Stewie's crisis, both storylines chasing validation through increasingly questionable methods. Stewie has an epiphany watching Joe and Bonnie spend time with baby Susie. Having a child brought them closer together, making Stewie conclude babies save relationships, a theory that divorce lawyers would probably dispute. He decides the solution to reconnecting with Brian involves creating a baby together, because nothing says, "let's hang out more," like introducing shared parental responsibility for a hybrid creature. Stewie plans an elaborate dinner to pitch the idea, setting up a romantic atmosphere complete with candles and Rupert getting kicked out. The dinner goes disastrously when Brian spends the entire meal texting. Every time Stewie tries discussing their future, Brian's phone buzzes with another distraction. The evening ends with Brian announcing he has a date and leaving, crushing Stewie's carefully planned proposal. Stewie realizes he needs to take matters into his own hands, literally stealing Brian's DNA through hair and saliva samples while he sleeps. The fertilization device gets constructed with disturbing efficiency, proving Stewie's genius extends to reproductive technology that probably violates multiple scientific ethics codes. The impregnation scene plays out like a body horror film, crossed with a Rube Goldberg machine. Stewie climbs into his fertilization device, adding preschool applications because they're already behind on admissions. The machine performs whatever mysterious process successfully implants Brian's DNA into Stewie's temporary uterus, a phrase that shouldn't exist outside fever dreams. Stewie emerges pregnant, revealing the positive test to Brian the next morning. Brian's reaction involves screaming about people thinking he had relations with a male baby, which understandably ranks high on the list of legitimate concerns. Brian demands Stewie get in termination immediately, refusing to even say the word initially. Stewie plays the wronged partner angle, accusing Brian of treating him like some promiscuous person when he's just carrying their child. The argument escalates until Brian punches pregnant Stewie, which crosses several lines simultaneously: domestic violence, child abuse, and assault on an expectant parent, all rolled into one awful moment. Stewie threatens to burn Brian in his bed, which seems like fair warning given the circumstances. The pregnancy progresses at cartoon speed, jumping from 2 days to 6 months, with Stewie admitting there's guesswork involved in the timeline. Dr. Hartman performs a prenatal checkup, somehow missing that his patient is a 1-year-old male baby, despite noticing the anatomy situation. When Hartman points out the presence of male reproductive organs where female ones should be, Stewie claims he sneezed so hard everything came out, a medical explanation that somehow satisfies the doctor. Brian asks about stairs in the building, contemplating whether gravity could solve their problem. The shopping montage shows Stewie embracing pregnancy stereotypes, buying tiny clothes, experiencing cravings for burgers and mint chip ice cream, getting maternity photos taken. Chris asks if they can see the father's head on the belly, calling Stewie Dad, and triggering an emotional moment. The whole sequence plays like a normal pregnancy journey, except for the fundamental wrongness of every single element involved. Peter and Joe continue their viral video quest, eventually filming a frog in a miniskirt dancing to Bon Jovi while monkeys watch, because that's apparently what gets views. Stewie goes into labor at the worst possible moment, forcing Brian to deliver the babies in the car. The birth scene commits fully to body horror when multiple hybrid creatures emerge from various locations, including Stewie's mouth. 7 human-dog hybrid babies arrive, each with unique deformities. One looks like Brian, another has loose bones, one comes out blind, another deaf. The deaf one later gets run over by Joe's lawnmower because it couldn't hear the danger, reducing the litter to 6 through casual tragedy. The parenting reality crushes both of them immediately. The hybrids require constant attention, specialized schools for their various disabilities, and supervision to prevent them eating each other. Brian admits he can't handle fatherhood, especially to 4 children. The count keeps dropping as babies meet unfortunate ends. Stewie finally reveals the truth. He orchestrated everything because Brian seemed distant. Brian explains he was only giving space because Stewie seemed moody. They both realize the entire pregnancy resulted from a communication failure that could have been solved with one honest conversation. They agree to abandon the hybrid babies at an animal shelter, keeping the baby shower gifts because waste not, want not. The episode ends with them ditching their offspring and returning to normal friendship, having learned absolutely nothing except that creating life to fix relationship problems ranks among history's worst ideas. Family Guy proved it could make pregnancy and childbirth deeply uncomfortable while somehow making infant abandonment seem like the reasonable choice. The show wanted its body horror cake and ate it too, with extra nightmare fuel on the side. Now let's move on to the next episode, and this one is surprisingly dark. Herpes the Love Sore. In episode Herpes the Love Sore, Family Guy decided Brian should knowingly give Stewie herpes through a blood brother ceremony, which feels like the show asked itself what disease transmission method hadn't been explored yet and landed on ancient bonding rituals gone wrong. The episode proves the show could make permanent STD transmission. Between a baby and a dog somehow feel like the logical next step in their friendship arc. The setup begins with Peter receiving a package intended for Quagmire containing a whip. Peter faces an ethical dilemma about whether to deliver it to the rightful owner or open it to check for He-Man toys. The fact this qualifies as a genuine moral quandary says everything about Peter's decision-making process. He chooses chaos, spending the rest of the day whipping everything in sight, cigarettes from mouths, objects off shelves, and various family members who happen to be standing nearby. Joe sends Cleveland a warning text about Peter having a whip given his racial heritage, which the show plays for maximum uncomfortable comedy points. Stewie and Brian watch The Outlaw Josie Wales, where characters perform a blood brother ceremony. Stewie gets enchanted by the concept of friends intermingling blood to seal a bond deeper than friendship. He insists they perform the ritual immediately, explaining they're more than best friends since they share a home and countless adventures. Brian reluctantly agrees, mostly because Stewie reminds him about the time Brian used him as a fire hydrant. Payback manifests in strange ways. They cut their hands and shake, officially becoming blood brothers in the least hygienic bonding ceremony possible. The situation at the Drunken Clam escalates when 3 aggressive guys steal Peter, Joe, and Quagmire's regular booth. The confrontation goes poorly when Peter tries threatening them with Quagmire's whip, Joe's taser, and eventually a Hawaiian shirt meant for strangulation. The guys back down completely, choosing the dignity-free option of tucking their reproductive organs between their legs and waddling out. The defeat creates a domino effect of humiliation. Everyone in Quahog hears about their cowardice, leading to widespread disrespect. Chris makes Peter wear Lois's bra. Joe's wife refuses intimate relations with a quarter of a man, and even Meg starts giving orders. Stewie wakes up the next morning with a massive herpes sore on his lip. He immediately realizes Brian infected him through the blood brother ceremony, confronting him with the physical evidence. Brian initially denies having herpes until Stewie physically examines him, discovering he's essentially more herpes than dog underneath his fur. Brian admits he knew about the infection all along, defending himself by claiming herpes carries worse stigma than actual symptoms. He suggests rebranding the disease as BOPO to make it sound cute and approachable, a public health strategy that probably wouldn't pass FDA approval. The herpes revelation devastates Stewie socially. He shows up to help with wedding invitations only to have everyone scream and flee when they see his facial sore. School becomes a nightmare when classmates run away in terror after his teacher removes the fake beard he's using to hide the outbreak. Charlotte, the teacher, delivers the brutal truth that his mouth looks like the underside of a boat, which ranks among the more creative insults for visible infections. Stewie finds himself lonelier than a Kennedy family reunion, where the only attendee gets immediately assassinated. The show really commits to its dark historical humor. Chris reveals he also contracted herpes from Brian through their own blood brother ceremony. Brian apparently made this mistake multiple times, knowingly spreading the infection to different family members without warning anyone. Stewie and Chris form an alliance to punish Brian for his reckless disease distribution. They hack his Facebook account, sabotage his dates by announcing his herpes status to potential partners, and generally make his life miserable through coordinated revenge tactics. Brian's romantic prospects evaporate when Stewie and Chris show up at restaurants specifically to inform his dates about his medical situation. Meanwhile, Lois forces Peter to confront the booth situation like an adult. Peter, Joe, and eventually Quagmire return to the Drunken Clam for a rematch. The fight goes exactly as poorly as expected until Peter delivers an impassioned speech about the booth being his entire life. He witnessed the Challenger explosion, September 11th, and Obama's election, all from that specific seating arrangement, a confession that raises questions about his priorities during national tragedies. The confrontation ends when the aggressive guys reveal their soldiers shipping to Afghanistan for their third tour. Everyone immediately celebrates them as heroes, declaring it these three guys' day, while the original three guys get forgotten entirely. Stewie finally confronts Brian about the betrayal, explaining he can't trust his best friend anymore. Brian apologizes, admitting he felt too embarrassed about having herpes to warn anyone before the blood ceremonies. The confession leads to reconciliation, with Stewie accepting that he'll have the infection for life. Brian explains it only flares during stressful periods like weddings or job interviews, which feels like adding insult to permanent viral infection. The episode ends with them mending their friendship, while Stewie contemplates future outbreaks during important life moments. The show treated herpes transmission like a friendship obstacle rather than a serious health issue, making light of permanent STD consequences through cartoon logic. Family Guy proved it could make disease transmission weirdly wholesome, while simultaneously being completely inappropriate about every aspect of the situation. The episode wanted its gross-out comedy and emotional resolution too, with extra discomfort spread liberally throughout. Now let's move on to the next episode, and it has a moment you'll remember. Partial Terms of Endearment. In episode Partial Terms of Endearment, Family Guy tackled abortion so directly that Fox refused to air it in the United States, instead releasing it only on DVD and international broadcasts. The episode becomes the show's most controversial installment because it genuinely engaged with abortion as a serious topic while still maintaining its comedic framework, which apparently crosses a line that toilet humor and violence somehow don't. The setup begins at Lois's 20-year college reunion, where she reconnects with Naomi, a woman she experimented with during her university years. Peter immediately assumes this means he's about to participate in adult activities involving three people, spending the rest of the evening preparing for something that exists only in his imagination. Every interaction gets filtered through Peter's fantasy lens. When Naomi says she wants to propose something, Peter thinks he's living a dream scenario. When she mentions wanting both Lois and Peter to participate in something, Peter starts planning bedroom logistics. Naomi arrives at the Griffin house with her husband Dale, which Peter interprets as an unexpected addition to his imagined evening plans. He ranks Dale last in his mental order of operations, demonstrating the kind of logic that makes Peter who he is. Lois gives a house tour while Peter keeps interrupting with pornographic scenarios, pizza delivery to a sorority house, the professor offering extra credit, concentration camp guards, preventing train departures. Each terrible setup gets shut down by Lois apologizing to their confused guests. The actual request finally emerges during dinner. Naomi and Dale can't have children because her eggs won't attach despite successful conception. They're asking Lois to serve as their surrogate, carrying their biological child to term. Peter's disappointment at discovering this wasn't about group activities becomes the least important reaction in the room. Lois feels honored by the request but needs time to consider such a life-altering decision, comparing it to an Italian person choosing to get glasses, a comparison that makes sense only in Peter's presence. Lois announces her decision to carry the baby, wanting Peter's blessing despite knowing he'll oppose it. Peter responds with characteristic grace, threatening to put his stool in her eye and comparing her reproductive system to a Red Roof Inn. The family weighs in, Meg volunteers herself, leading to a joke about her previously giving birth to Stewie that lands uncomfortably. Chris provides weather commentary. Stewie objects to the surrogacy arrangement on principle. Peter forbids the entire plan, expecting Lois to blindly follow his unilateral decisions because that's apparently how they coexist, alongside the tiny race of people living in their carpet, who play music, hoping Peter will bless them with food. The medical procedure goes forward despite Peter's objections. Dr. Hartman explains the risks using combinations of celebrity genetics that produce horrifying results. Shelley Duvall and James Blunt create one monstrosity, while Florence Griffith Joyner and Stephen Hawking produce another. The fertilized embryos get inserted via South American Jovito's blowgun specialists because apparently that's standard medical practice in Quahog. The test confirms pregnancy, sending Peter into sabotage mode involving rickety staircases, faulty wiring, gay poltergeists, breakdancers performing on stomachs, and an Acme miscarriage kit. The situation transforms completely when a news report announces Naomi and Dale died in a highway pileup. The same broadcast starts announcing Dale won the lottery before awkwardly cutting off, creating the show's darkest joke about timing and fate. The family faces a genuine dilemma. Lois is pregnant with a baby whose biological parents are dead, leaving no one to raise the child. The options narrow to adoption or termination, with Brian suggesting they at least visit a family planning center to understand their choices. Peter accompanies Lois to the clinic, planning to sit in the car and pretend he's racing. Outside, he encounters pro-life protesters who show him a propaganda video titled "Abortion Madness." The presentation features manipulative imagery, including Ziggy, the zygote, with tiny invisible arms that will someday fold in prayer, claims that aborted fetuses include the guy who would have killed Hitler and Osama bin Laden's America-loving older brother who would have stopped September 11th. The video insists abortion is also larceny, jaywalking, and securities fraud. Peter gets completely converted, bursting into the clinic to save the unborn fetus child from the procedure. The family argument that follows covers every standard abortion debate talking point. Brian challenges Peter's newfound pro-life stance by asking if he'd adopt an unwanted baby from an orphanage. Peter clarifies he's only here to save the unborn. Once they exit the reproductive system, they can take care of themselves. Brian presents scenarios involving assault, incest, and threats to the mother's life. Peter responds that women should have thought about assault before asking him for directions, that Cousin Lou's child with touching eyes, nicknamed Touches, deserves to exist and does great needlework, and he doesn't understand 7 of the words in Brian's medical scenario. Lois insists on her legal right to choose what happens with her body. Peter threatens to blow up the clinic, with Lois pointing out he'd be killing doctors to prove killing is wrong. The logic loop finally penetrates Peter's conversion, making him realize the contradiction. Lois suggests they go upstairs and have a long talk, not coming down until they've reached a decision both can accept. The show presents this as the responsible approach, genuine discussion between partners facing an impossible situation. The episode ends with an extended monologue from Peter, listing all the challenges and costs of raising a child, building toward what seems like acceptance of parenthood. He talks about cutbacks, diapers, crying, sleepless nights, medical costs, driver's education, and college tuition. But then he concludes, it means one more person to share the world with, another little voice in the back seat, one more griffin to love. The music swells, the sentiment lands, and Peter delivers the punchline, "We had the abortion." The episode got banned from Fox broadcast because it presented abortion as a legitimate option that reasonable people might choose. Family Guy refused to moralize or punish Lois for her decision, instead showing a couple weighing difficult options and making a choice they could live with. The show proved it could handle serious topics while maintaining its comedic voice, which apparently made network executives more uncomfortable than any amount of violence or crude humor ever did. Now let's move on to the next episode, and this one takes a turn fast. Road to the North Pole. In episode Road to the North Pole, Family Guy decided to destroy the magic of Christmas by revealing Santa as a dying old man running a nightmarish sweatshop filled with mutated inbred elves, toxic waste, and cannibalistic reindeer. The episode becomes the show's darkest holiday special, proving that adding body horror and home invasion to festive cheer creates something nobody asked for but everyone remembers. The setup begins at the mall, where Stewie waits in line to see Santa Claus for hours. Brian tries cutting in line with Quagmire, accidentally insulting his niece Abby by assuming the bald child is a boy when she's actually undergoing chemotherapy, because Brian's social awareness operates at negative levels. Quagmire kicks them to the back of the line, forcing them to wait even longer. When Stewie finally reaches the front, Mall Santa announces he's done for the day and suggests meeting at the Applebee's bar if anyone wants lap time. The rejection devastates Stewie, who compares it to reality turning its back on Gary Busey. Stewie demands Brian drive him to the actual North Pole so he can confront Santa about the disrespect. Brian refuses initially, leading Stewie to hijack a truck and force the issue. They discover a fake North Pole tourist trap with black teenagers selling merchandise, Ferris wheels, and someone hosing vomit. Stewie realizes he's been tricked, asking pointed questions about why the North Pole has attractions normally found at amusement parks. Brian tries claiming Katrina refugees relocated there, which somehow makes less sense than the actual explanation. Stewie reveals his true intention. He's going to kill Santa Claus for blowing him off at the mall. Brian attempts talking him out of it, suggesting Stewie write a Christmas list instead. Stewie clarifies this was never about presents, this is about revenge and making Santa's wife watch the execution. Brian tries one more desperate deflection, nearly admitting Santa doesn't exist before pivoting to warnings about disappointment. Stewie accuses Brian of having a negative attitude like Eeyore, who apparently has a nail in his anus, explaining his depression. The journey north involves a flare gun accident that destroys Brian's Prius, hitching rides with Canadian truckers, and accepting a snowmobile plus cash and a dismembered leg from an overly generous Canadian, because apparently that's standard hospitality. They spend a night in an abandoned cabin with help from the Aurora Boreanas, continue on foot through blizzards, and eventually reach the actual North Pole. What they find looks nothing like the magical workshop from Songs and Poetry. Instead, it resembles Bridgeport, Connecticut, in terms of urban decay and abandoned buildings. Santa turns out to be real, but completely broken. He begs Stewie to kill him, revealing years of increased demands destroyed everything. The world's population growth combined with escalating gift expectations transformed toy production into an industrial nightmare. Wooden choo-choos and ragdolls got replaced by iPods and complex electronics. The toxic waste from manufacturing poisons everything. The original family of magic elves required constant expansion through inbreeding, creating a sickly race of mutated genetic disasters where 60% are born blind. The workload destroys them until instinct takes over and they walk into the snow to die, where feral reindeer with bloodlust for elf flesh consume the corpses. A musical number explains how Christmas went from joyful celebration to hellish existence. Santa looks 28 despite being ancient. The elves work themselves to death on crack in Iraq-like conditions. Everyone involved wants the system to end but can't stop because children's expectations keep growing. The song "Christmas Time is Killing Us" lays out the horror in verse form, complete with Santa coughing up blood and elves bleeding from their fingers. The whole operation runs on suffering, and God apparently abandoned them long ago. Also, Santa mentions meeting Allah soon, which freaks everyone out briefly. Santa collapses on Christmas Eve. The doctor warns that going out will kill him. Brian and Stewie volunteer to deliver presents themselves, discovering immediately why one man can't handle global distribution. Their first house takes an hour and a half. They forget presents in the sleigh, get locked out, break back in through windows, eat all the cookies instead of taking symbolic bites, and accidentally invade the wrong home. They assault the father with a baseball bat when he threatens to call police, terrorize the mother and daughter when discovered, tie everyone up with duct tape, and flee when alarms summon authorities. The reindeer start eating each other in the yard, while Brian and Stewie realize Christmas is literally impossible. They return to Quahog with dying Santa, appearing on the news to explain why Christmas failed. Brian asks the world to limit requests to one gift per person per year, giving Santa a fighting chance at survival. The entire planet agrees to scale back expectations, singing about learning to live with less. The episode ends with collective sacrifice saving Christmas, though presumably Santa still runs a horrific sweatshop producing reduced quantities of suffering. Family Guy took the Road To format and applied it to destroying childhood wonder through uncomfortable truth-telling. The show wanted its heartwarming message about restraint and its nightmare fuel about industrial exploitation, creating a holiday special that somehow makes consumerism critique feel more disturbing than actual horror films. The episode proved you could make Santa Claus real and still ruin Christmas for everyone watching. Now, let's move on to the next episode, and it's honestly kind of insane. Dial Meg for Murder. In episode Dial Meg for Murder, Family Guy decided Meg should go to prison and return as a violent sociopath who terrorizes her family, which feels like the show finally asking, what if we made Meg the scary one for once? The episode becomes a surprisingly effective commentary on how incarceration transforms people, wrapped in the show's trademark absurdist humor and complete disregard for realistic character development timelines. The setup begins with Peter deciding to join the rodeo, despite knowing absolutely nothing about horses and being in terrible physical condition. Lois tries warning him, but Peter insists he flings doors wide open when life comes knocking, rather than hiding in the kitchen like her. He cites TV Guide, or The Guide, as he unsuccessfully tries making a thing, as proof this will work out, noting the episode description says he gets more than he bargained for. The rodeo goes exactly as predictably as you'd expect. The bull dominates Peter completely, with Peter confessing he's actually a breeding bull back at the ranch before things get deeply uncomfortable. Brian attends the rodeo to watch his idiot friend compete, meeting an editor from Teen People magazine who's impressed he wrote for The New Yorker. She offers him work writing about the everyday activities of average American teenage girls, leading Brian to declare he loves teenage girls because they haven't turned into disagreeable adults yet, a statement that sounds worse every time you examine it. He accepts the assignment and decides the best research method involves climbing a ladder outside Meg's window to observe her daily routine like the world's least subtle stalker. Brian follows Meg across town, discovering she's visiting someone at an adult correctional institute. Meg has been dating Luke, a convict she met through a school pen pal project who robbed a convenience store to pay for his mother's medication. Their prison visits involve exchanging letters and hair samples, because apparently that's romantic rather than evidence for a restraining order. Luke's parole hearing went poorly, meaning another 3 years inside, but Meg vows to wait however long it takes. Brian immediately runs to tell Lois, betraying Meg's trust faster than you can say research ethics violation. The family confronts Meg about her prison boyfriend. Peter goes to find his Cosby sweater for serious parenting, never locating it, but somehow that detail matters less than Lois forbidding Meg from seeing Luke again. Meg protests that they genuinely connect and she loves him, but Lois shuts down the relationship anyway. The conversation gets interrupted by Brian's editor Angela demanding he come over for relations, with Brian making up an excuse about work needing him. The family dynamic shows everyone treating Meg's feelings as inherently invalid, which becomes important context for what happens later. Luke escapes prison during a riot specifically to see Meg, climbing over the fence and showing up at her window. He jokes about filing down a toothbrush and stabbing the guard with the most children, which disturbs Meg until he clarifies he's kidding, though she's still getting used to his sense of humor. Brian discovers Luke hiding in Meg's room, confronting them about harboring a fugitive being a felony. Meg asks if Brian will betray her again, putting him in an impossible position. Peter spots Luke in a prison jumpsuit and consults TV Guide. Discovering the episode description mentions Meg dating a prison escapee. He calls Joe, who arrests both Luke and Meg for harboring an escaped convict. Meg serves her sentence and returns home completely transformed. She immediately establishes dominance by declaring everyone her victims now, demanding to know who's the biggest and toughest in the house. Peter tries claiming the distinction before Chris warns him to show humility to save his life. Meg showers, with Brian using a loofah in ways that traumatize him, keeps a waste bucket in her room that she refuses to empty until full, uses Peter's shirts as toilet paper, and generally makes the house feel like a prison extension. At school, she cracks 3 students' skulls open, getting suspended while earning fear and respect from classmates who previously mocked her. Brian explains the penal system took an innocent girl and created a psychotic, sociopathic freak through institutionalization. The family tries deflecting blame for calling Meg a freak, with everyone pointing fingers until they land on Stewie, who protests that now suddenly everyone understands him. Meg announces plans to leave town by week's end, needing money for her escape. She forces Peter and Stewie to accompany her to Mort's pharmacy, where she pulls a gun and demands cash. Mort offers her the leukemia charity jar, admitting he doesn't give donations to sick children anyway. Brian arrives and tries talking Meg down from armed robbery. He shows her the Teen People article he wrote, describing her as someone who faces adolescent challenges with hopeful eyes and uncommon resilience. The piece explains Meg isn't a typical American girl, she's far sweeter and kinder than average. The words remind Meg of her true self rather than the hardened criminal prison created. She realizes she became the abuser because she was tired of being everyone's target, handing over the weapon and apologizing for her actions. Brian welcomes back the real Meg, who returns to her normal doormat status. The episode ends with Meg mentioning she met Wesley Snipes in prison, who was inmate 57, a reference to his movie Passenger 57 that lands as weakly as Peter predicted strong endings require. The show treated incarceration's psychological impact seriously for approximately 20 minutes before resetting Meg to factory settings. Family Guy proved it could explore how prison hardens people, while ultimately maintaining the status quo, where Meg exists primarily to absorb abuse. The episode wanted its criminal justice commentary, and its return to normal button too, creating something that almost said something meaningful before chickening out at the last second. Now let's move on to the next episode, and it gets chaotic real quick. Before we continue the video, subscribe to our channel. Steroids. In episode Steroids, Family Guy decided Stewie should take steroids and become a violent, vein-popping toddler who terrorizes Brian through physical intimidation, which feels like the show exploring what happens when you give performance-enhancing drugs to someone whose biggest achievement is usually building time machines. The episode proves the show could make steroid abuse darkly comedic while simultaneously examining high school popularity dynamics through Chris's parallel storyline. The setup begins at Joe's barbecue, where the men gather around the grill to perform their ritual of commenting on meat while it cooks. Peter demonstrates proper male bonding by noting the meat looks good, reminding Joe not to flip too often to preserve juices, and generally contributing nothing useful while feeling important about it. Lois and Bonnie apply sunblock to each other, with Lois going unnecessarily low, prompting Quagmire's predictable response. The conversation touches on Joe's son Kevin dying in Iraq, which everyone acknowledges with minimal emotion before moving on. Stewie gets beaten up by baby Susie Swanson, which Peter finds more humiliating than watching Family Ties episodes centered on Tina Yothers, where the audience learns Jennifer got her period and everyone decides they'll see the Keatons next week. Peter becomes obsessed with his son getting dominated by a girl, worried about the long-term consequences. He explains his greatest fear involves World War V, which skips over conflicts 3 and 4 because it's so intense. Lois tries explaining sequential numbering doesn't work that way, but Peter declares he has spoken and the conversation ends. Peter takes Stewie to the gym to teach him about being a man, which involves drinking beer and projecting inadequacies onto children. He asks Stewie if he thinks he's better than Peter, accuses him of believing he would have gotten promotions Peter missed, and generally creates hostility out of nothing before settling in to watch Spike TV. At the gym, a stranger with a dirty needle offers Stewie pharmaceutical help when he struggles lifting barbells. Peter trusts the stranger immediately because he believes everything everyone tells him anywhere, allowing the injection of steroids into his infant son. The transformation happens instantly. Stewie becomes massively muscular, declaring he has the power while striking He-Man poses. He develops aggressive behavior, charging rent to use the hallway, $10 per crossing, and punching Brian repeatedly whenever he tries speaking. The toll in the hall situation escalates to the point where Brian can't complete a single sentence without getting hit. Stewie becomes obsessed with vascularity, working out 8 times daily until every vein presses against his skin, convinced women love vascular men. Meanwhile, Chris gets targeted by Connie D'Amico for a social experiment. She's dated every popular boy in school and needs a new challenge, deciding to transform a loser into someone acceptable. Chris fits perfectly. He smells like Fred Flintstone's rear end and ranks as maximally unpopular, though Smiley McGee competes for the title with his bedwetting problem. Connie approaches Chris, announces they're dating Saturday night, and begins his makeover into someone she can tolerate being seen with publicly. The transformation involves fixing Chris's hair to look deliberately messy, giving him a pencil-thin beard that makes him look like a rake, and teaching him not to care about anything. Chris genuinely likes Connie, telling her she's nice and pretty and hoping they stay together long. No guy has ever spoken to her with such sincerity, making her realize she's been dating jerks. They skip the pep rally for a movie, specifically that Chaz Palminteri, Paul Sorvino film, Distracting Trumpet, which consists entirely of Italian-American actors yelling over loud horn music for 2 hours. Chris becomes genuinely popular. The jocks greet him with enthusiasm, invite him to pizza where they plan, making a struggling single mother feel promiscuous, and generally accept him into their social circle. Connie brings Chris home for dinner to meet his parents, where Peter immediately comments on her physical development in ways that make everyone uncomfortable. The dinner reveals Connie's father died 4 years ago, which Peter acknowledges while asking if she plans to shower before dessert. Chris throws a party that excludes Meg despite it being at her house. The popular kids explain she fails the required posterior to chest ratio, leaving her upstairs alone while everyone else parties. Chris starts cheating on Connie at his own event, getting physically involved with other girls while Connie watches. The betrayal devastates her since she genuinely developed feelings for Chris rather than treating him as a project. Chris attributes his popularity to beating up a Jewish kid rather than Connie's efforts, demonstrating how completely he's adopted terrible behavior. Connie teams up with Meg for revenge, despite their history of mutual hatred. Meg produces a book documenting every insult and humiliation Connie inflicted over the years, including being called Sticky Posterior Cow in 6th grade and having a plaster cast made of her anatomy freshman year. They coordinate with the A.V. department to publicly humiliate Chris during a school assembly. A video plays showing Chris dancing to Goodbye Horses in women's clothing, destroying his social standing instantly. The popular kids reject him immediately, and Connie reclaims her status according to high school hierarchy rules. Stewie's steroid supply runs out, causing rapid muscle loss and returning him to normal baby proportions. Brian gets revenge for weeks of hallway tolls and random beatings, threatening Stewie now that the power dynamic has shifted. Chris apologizes to Meg for being terrible, asking how he can make amends. Meg requests he describe what popularity felt like, and Chris explains it was like basking in higher intelligence that allows you to become part of everlasting glory. He claims he flew, which Meg accepts as sufficient payment. The episode explored how performance-enhancing drugs create artificial confidence while examining how popularity corrupts even fundamentally decent people. Family Guy proved it could make steroid abuse comedic through Stewie's aggressive behavior while showing Chris's transformation into someone unrecognizable. The show wanted its physical comedy and its social commentary too, creating parallel storylines about artificial enhancement chemical for Stewie, social for Chris, and the inevitable crashes when both situations normalize. Now let's move on to the next episode, and things start getting unusual. The Thin White Line. In episode The Thin White Line, Family Guy decided Brian should become a cocaine-addicted narcotics officer, which feels like the show exploring what happens when you give a talking dog access to evidence lockers and zero supervision. The episode becomes surprisingly effective at showing addiction's progression while maintaining the show's comedic framework, proving substance abuse can be both serious character development and setup for increasingly unhinged behavior. The setup begins with Brian feeling trapped in his own life, admitting he can't think of reasons to get out of bed anymore. His therapist Bruce suggests volunteer work to shift focus outward rather than remaining internally trapped. Brian decides to help others, which somehow leads to becoming a police narcotics dog, despite that not being traditional volunteer work. Joe recognizes Brian's exceptional sense of smell during a company picnic, noting they could use that ability at the precinct. Peter wins a week's paid vacation at the company picnic through a tranquilizer dart competition designed to take down Robert Downey Jr. The victory comes after everyone else gets shot with darts, leaving Peter standing by default rather than skill. The family plans using the vacation for a cruise to the Bahamas, with Peter sounding like an old salt talking about port versus starboard cabin choices. The excitement builds around this trip, becoming the family's reward for Peter's workplace triumph. Brian joins the police force as their newest narcotics officer, immediately demonstrating his abilities by identifying that someone returned from Manila, ate lumpia, made love to 2 Filipino women, and a man, though the person insists it was 3 women, prompting existential crisis. His first major bust involves finding cocaine, giving Brian the rush he's been seeking. The success makes him a local hero, with news coverage celebrating his accomplishments. He does school presentations as McGriffin the drug dog, teaching children about staying clean, while Gerald the happy and abstinent police clown discusses being free of sexually transmitted diseases. The addiction starts subtly. Brian volunteers to take evidence down to the station, separating from his colleagues to handle it alone. His behavior becomes increasingly erratic and aggressive. He busts a Sunday school class, insisting the children are actually drug-peddling midgets despite clear evidence they're normal kids. His energy levels spike unnaturally. His speech becomes rapid and paranoid, and he starts ranting about society's lost decency and virtue while his family tries having normal conversations about big league chew. The spiral accelerates when Brian gets suspended for excessive force at the airport. He conducts an illegal body cavity search on an innocent passenger, prompting his superior to confiscate his badge. Brian brings home Tina, another addict with dried blood under her nose, introducing her to the family while becoming verbally abusive. He insults Lois as a Stepford wife, calls Chris and Meg Quasimodo and Lumpy, and claims he leaves more personality in tightly coiled piles on the lawn than either of them possess. The family recognizes Brian has become someone unrecognizable. The intervention scene plays out with the family confronting Brian about his changed behavior. Peter explains Brian used to be his sidekick, reminiscing about their friendship through a flashback where Brian provided Thai music by playing himself like an instrument. The family expresses how much they miss the old Brian, the one who wasn't a jerk consumed by addiction. Brian initially tries deflecting before breaking down, admitting he needs help and agreeing to enter rehab. Peter discovers the rehab facility offers better amenities than their planned cruise tennis courts, full spa, mineral baths, and jacuzzis. He decides to pretend being an addict so he can vacation there, claiming he's on smack when asked. Brian tries explaining this is a detox clinic for people getting healthy, but Peter insists on staying, even participating in softball games where recovering addicts play pregnant teenagers from across the lake. Peter trades carpet fresh, claiming it's contraband, commits fully to the charade, and generally treats serious addiction recovery as an all-inclusive resort experience. The therapist identifies Peter as Brian's X factor, the negative influence enabling his destructive behavior. She explains that with Brian's intelligence and sensitivity, Peter's behavior pulls him toward poor decisions. Brian initially defends Peter as his best friend, who took him into his home and treated him like family. The therapist suggests their relationship contributes to Brian's problems, making Peter the element in Brian's life that led him toward drugs. The revelation forces Brian to examine their friendship dynamics. Brian completes rehab and returns home, with Lois performing a welcome song about being happy. Brian's home, cha cha cha. Peter hits on Meg, asking if she's 18 yet, demonstrating exactly the inappropriate behavior the therapist identified. Brian declares he's learned everyone is responsible for their own destiny, which is why he's leaving. The family stands shocked as Brian announces his departure, explaining he loves them all but must leave for himself. Peter tries stopping him at the last second as Brian heads to the airport. The episode explored addiction seriously while maintaining comedic elements throughout. Family Guy proved it could show substance abuse progression from seeking thrills to dependence to personality changes to rock bottom while still delivering jokes about pregnant teenagers and police clowns. The show wanted its PSA moment and its absurdist humor too, creating something that worked as both character study and cartoon chaos. Now let's move on to the next episode, and it gets surprisingly intense. Patriot Games. In episode Patriot Games, Family Guy decided Peter should join the New England Patriots and become an egomaniacal showboat who gets fired and shipped to London's worst football team, leading to a revenge match that goes exactly as well as bringing a butter knife to a gunfight. The episode also features Stewie systematically beating Brian senseless over a $50 debt, which Family Guy treats as both hilarious physical comedy and a legitimate collection strategy. The setup begins with Stewie making sports bets on Carol Channing, somehow defeating Mike Tyson in celebrity boxing, making Brian lose $50. This debt becomes the B-plot's entire motivation, with Stewie transforming into a loan shark whose collection methods involve extreme violence. Meanwhile, Peter receives his 25th high school reunion invitation and wants zero part of it, preferring Sunday night internet pornography featuring Chinese Lois, because apparently that's Peter's weekly schedule, and we're all forced to know this information. Quagmire suggests Peter lie about being successful since everyone fabricates achievements at reunions anyway. Peter shows up claiming he's a secret agent astronaut millionaire who works in space and bought his cowboy hat there. The lie falls apart when his former classmate introduces Tom Brady, the actual Patriots quarterback. Peter gets exposed, drinks heavily, and projectile vomits with such impressive distance that Tom Brady immediately offers him a roster spot. This might be the only time explosive regurgitation served as a successful tryout. The media coverage features Bob Costas interviewing Peter about living his dream. Peter's interview derails when he thanks both God and the devil, explaining that Satan's existence gives God purpose and prevents the Almighty from blowing his brains out from boredom. This theological discussion about keeping deities occupied happens on live sports television while someone asks Diane Simmons if her first husband actually did blow his brains out. She confirms this happened. Peter's ego inflates faster than a bouncy castle at a kid's birthday party. He shows up late to games, wears ridiculous outfits, and showboats constantly despite Tom Brady's warnings. During one game, Peter scores a touchdown and launches into a full production of Shapoopy from The Music Man, complete with choreography and approximately 6 minutes of screen time. Tom Brady explicitly told him multiple times to stop showboating, making this performance the football equivalent of flipping off your boss while dancing on their desk. The Patriots fire Peter and sell his contract to the London Silly Nannies, Europe's worst football team. The Silly Nannies consist entirely of effeminate men who break into song about marriage proposals and domestic duties, treating football practice like musical theater rehearsal. Peter initially wants to quit, but Lois convinces him to turn the team around and challenge the Patriots to a grudge match for redemption. Peter gives the Silly Nannies steroids to toughen them up, which goes about as well as expected when their most aggressive trash talk involves threatening pillow fights in pajamas. The match begins and reality sets in. The Patriots are professional athletes, and the Silly Nannies are musical theater enthusiasts who got briefly swole. The size difference becomes apparent when the Silly Nannies see the Patriots charging and flee in terror, piling into a carriage for escape like they're in a Victorian novel. The Patriots demolish everyone. Peter stands alone, getting absolutely destroyed by the entire team in what becomes less a football game and more a public execution via tackling. Tom Brady approaches afterward and compliments Peter's courage for standing alone against the entire roster. Lois expresses relief that Peter can still move his legs, admitting she thought he'd become a vegetable, and she lacks the emotional strength to handle that situation. A confession that's either brutally honest or deeply concerning about their marriage. The Stewie-Brian subplot features escalating violence over the $50 gambling debt. Stewie gives Brian 24 hours to pay, which Brian fails to do. The collection process begins with Stewie drinking orange juice before beating him senseless, asking repeatedly, "Where's my money?" while inflicting damage requiring hospitalization. The violence continues with Stewie shooting Brian in both knees and setting him on fire. Stewie offers Brian one free revenge shot to make them even, refusing to specify when this retaliation will occur. Brian spends the episode in paranoid anticipation, with the revenge shot apparently still pending. The episode explored ego and redemption while featuring extended musical numbers and graphic violence played for laughs. Family Guy proved it could make professional sports both aspirational and completely ridiculous, creating a story where vomiting leads to success, and musical theater training prepares you for football about as well as bringing a pool noodle to a sword fight. Now, let's move on to the next episode, and this one escalates fast. Peter Harassment. In episode Peter Harassment, Family Guy decided workplace sexual harassment could be comedy gold if the victim is a man and the perpetrator is an unattractive woman, which feels like the show asking, what if we took a serious HR violation and played it for laughs while simultaneously exploring why nobody takes male victims seriously? The episode becomes surprisingly effective at showing double standards around harassment while wrapping everything in the show's trademark absurdist humor and a resolution involving identity fraud plus proxy intimacy. The setup begins with Stewie's school performing a musical about Terry Schiavo, the woman in a persistent vegetative state whose case became national news. The production features cheerful songs about life support equipment, with lyrics explaining which machines keep her liver clean and which dispense gravy for her mashed potato brains. Stewie plays the plug that gets pulled, a role previously held by kindergartner Jared for 3 consecutive years. Jared gives Stewie advice about being the best plug he can be while asking if he has gummy bears, establishing himself as the cool older kid who peaked early. Stewie gets stage fright and freezes during his big moment, with Peter filming the meltdown while making jokes for future Peter to enjoy when watching the tape later. Peter encounters Richard Dreyfuss at the play and films himself harassing the actor for autographs. When Dreyfuss refuses, Peter follows him into the bathroom and captures footage of him exiting, then submits the tape to TMZ. The show airs his video and pays him $100, which Peter uses to purchase a $4,000 video camera, math that makes sense only in Peter's financial universe. He declares himself a video paparazzi and begins following everyone around Quahog, badgering Stewie during breakfast and ambushing Tom Tucker about his sexuality. The journalism career peaks with him punching Ollie Williams in the face, breaking his glasses in the process. Peter switches to contact lenses after his glasses get destroyed. Angela, his boss at the brewery, suddenly notices him for the first time. She sees his eyes and eyelashes and declares them beautiful, initiating what becomes sustained workplace harassment. Angela grabs Peter's posterior, summons him to her office where she's created an elaborate fantasy scenario involving a dusty gas station and Diet Pepsi machine, and forces him to wear denim shorts as his new uniform. She makes him wipe his neck with a cold soda can while she watches, creating situations so uncomfortable they'd normally trigger immediate HR investigations. The family dismisses Peter's concerns entirely. Lois explains that women can't sexually harass men because guys enjoy being touched by women, making harassment impossible if you enjoy it. Meg shares that her chemistry teacher rubbed her shoulders for 35 minutes on a day she didn't wear a bra and forced her to do things to him, which the family accepts as legitimate harassment because of the power dynamic between older man and younger woman. Peter's situation gets treated as fundamentally different despite the identical power imbalance and unwanted advances. Chris asks the obvious question about why Angela's behavior doesn't qualify as harassment, receiving no satisfactory answer beyond cultural assumptions about gender and desire. Angela escalates by calling Peter at home and demanding he breathe into the phone for her gratification. She invites him to her house for a special project, making clear she expects intimacy or he'll face termination. Peter realizes he faces an impossible choice: submit to unwanted relations and give Angela all the power, or refuse and get labeled as someone with alternative preferences, plus lose his job. Quagmire offers to help by positioning himself through Peter's zipper, creating a body double situation where Angela thinks she's with Peter. The plan falls apart when Quagmire sees Angela and refuses to proceed, calling her a complete dumpster fire. Peter finally stands up to Angela, accepting termination rather than continuing the harassment. Peter drinks at the Drunken Clam where Robert Mitchum appears on television slapping women and explaining that you can hit anyone with a face, followed by a joke about NBA players and domestic violence that aged poorly. Mitchum's ghost gives Peter a pep talk about masculinity involving standing up to fart and drinking from necessity rather than pleasure. Peter drives drunk to Angela's house and discovers her attempting to end her life via carbon monoxide poisoning. He pulls her from the garage and learns she's been alone for 10 years, with Peter's rejection confirming her belief that nobody will ever find her attractive again. Peter hatches a plan to help Angela regain confidence. He disguises himself as Reginald New York Knickerbocker, a millionaire who takes her to an upscale restaurant called The Stuffy Fella. The disguise consists of a fake mustache, accent, and elaborate backstory about having 24 hours to live. Angela falls for the character completely, enjoying dinner and conversation with someone who finds her attractive. When Reginald tries leaving, Angela threatens self-harm unless he sleeps with her just once to give her the confidence she needs. Peter uses Mort as a body double this time, forgetting about him afterward, and Angela reveals the next morning that she knew Peter's identity all along, securing his return to work through coercion disguised as mutual satisfaction. The episode explored sexual harassment double standards while making every possible wrong choice about how to handle the subject matter. Family Guy proved it could identify real problems with how society treats male victims while simultaneously reinforcing those exact problems through its resolution. The show wanted its social commentary and its offensive punchlines too, creating something that almost said something important before deciding proxy intimacy solves workplace violations better than actual HR departments. Now let's move on to the next episode, and it's packed with weird moments. And remember to subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying the video so far. Quagmire's dad. In episode Quagmire's Dad, Family Guy decided to explore transgender identity through the lens of Quagmire's decorated war hero father, transitioning to become a woman, which somehow leads to Brian unknowingly sleeping with her, and Quagmire nearly beating him to death. The episode becomes the show's most controversial handling of LGBTQ topics, proving Family Guy could tackle serious identity issues while simultaneously making every possible offensive joke along the way. The setup begins with Brian leaving for a seminar in New Haven about creating web-based internet series. The family says goodbye like he's leaving forever, with Peter and Lois casually accepting that Brian will eventually walk into the woods to die since he's a dog. The conversation establishes that Brian's last name, Griffin, is a pleasantry extended by the family with zero legal standing, making his position in the household more tenuous than anyone previously acknowledged. Brian leaves frustrated while Stewie calls him repeatedly with pointless updates about mail delivery times and interesting things happening that Brian can't see over the phone. Quagmire announces his father, Dan, is visiting for the Naval Ball, where the military will honor his Vietnam War heroism. Dan Quagmire arrives with an elaborate entrance set to "These boots are made for walking," establishing himself as a flamboyant Navy lieutenant commander who orders Cosmos and tells long-winded stories about haircuts and weather conditions. Peter immediately recognizes Dan as gay, texting Joe during the story that he's super gay, based on mannerisms, speech patterns, and allegedly having the complete Sex and the City DVD collection between his anatomy, though Peter admits he made up that last detail for color. Peter tries explaining to Quagmire that his father demonstrates obvious signs, but Quagmire remains in complete denial. He accuses Peter of jealousy since Peter's father is a drunk, while Quagmire's father is a decorated hero. The Naval Ball becomes a minefield of unintentional double entendres as fellow service members describe Dan being surrounded by seamen, taking loads, stroking privates, and having the best genital nickname in the military. Every compliment lands as increasingly explicit until Quagmire finally demands the truth from his father. Dan reveals he's a woman trapped in a man's body and plans to have gender confirmation surgery while in Quahog. Quagmire protests that his father should just be gay, treating it as a less extreme option. Peter agrees it sounds the same, leading to confusion about whether Dan would become a lesbian or date men, prompting more gay accusations from Peter and Joe. Quagmire struggles with whether to attend the surgery, eventually bringing Peter along for moral support. Peter suggests keeping anything the doctor removes for Brian as a dog toy, which Lois calls very green in a statement she admits makes zero sense and came from something she heard on television. The surgery completes successfully, with Dan emerging as Ida with a new name and feminine presentation. She explains the procedure involved turning her anatomy inside out to simulate female anatomy, which prompts uncomfortable dinner conversation at the Griffin house. Lois and Ida bond over fashion and shopping, discussing Anne Klein clothes and where Ida bought her outfit. The femininity displayed by Ida disturbs Quagmire, who complains his war hero father now discusses decorating and women's clothing. Ida explains she's changing her future while her past accomplishments remain valid, but Quagmire struggles accepting the transformation despite wanting his parent to be happy. Brian returns from his seminar and meets Ida at the Marriott hotel bar. They connect over drinks, discussing writing and life philosophy. Brian describes watching the world like a huge screen where every interaction becomes another scene captured by camera. The connection leads to Brian's room where they spend the night together. Brian returns home ecstatic about meeting the whole package and finding his soulmate, showing Peter and Lois a photo. They laugh uncontrollably when recognizing Ida, making this the best day of their lives according to Lois. Brian insists they're jealous of his real woman, remaining oblivious to everyone's reaction. Stewie learns about Quagmire's father's transition and asks questions about what transgender people do regarding relationships and intimacy. Brian mentions being at the Marriott recently, with Stewie suggesting maybe Brian saw Dan without knowing. Brian confirms he'd recognize the person, asking what name they use now. When Stewie says Ida, Brian begins retching violently, realizing the truth. Both Brian and Stewie scream in horror as the revelation sets in, with Brian asking how this happens and complaining about notification requirements for new residents treating transgender people like registered offenders. which crosses several lines simultaneously. Quagmire reconciles with Ida, apologizing for his selfishness and accepting her happiness as what matters most. Ida mentions meeting someone amazing, and when Quagmire asks the name, she reveals it's Brian. Quagmire screams and finds Brian, beating him severely while yelling threats about blowing his head off if he comes near the house. Brian lies bleeding on the ground as Quagmire delivers the final line about having had relations with Brian's dad, ending the episode on maximum awkwardness. The episode explored transgender identity while making it the setup for an elaborate gross-out joke about Brian's sexual encounter. Family Guy proved it could address serious topics about gender identity and family acceptance, while simultaneously treating the entire situation as nightmare fuel designed for shock value rather than genuine exploration of LGBTQ experiences. Now let's move on to the next episode, and you'll see why it stands out. Con Heiress. In episode Con Heiress, Family Guy decided Brian and Stewie should become con artists targeting wealthy Newport heiresses for their fortunes, which somehow runs parallel to a subplot featuring Herbert grooming a child version of Peter in ways that cross every possible line. The episode becomes one of the show's most uncomfortable half hours, proving Family Guy could make inheritance fraud seem wholesome compared to whatever happens in that B-plot. The setup begins with Brian attending a charity ball with an elderly, wealthy woman, raising immediate suspicions from the family. Brian insists he's providing companionship to a widow who appreciates his friendship, noting that dogs are known for companionship, a statement that sounds progressively worse as the episode continues. Meanwhile, Peter refuses to mow the lawn because the friends of distinction are grazing in the grass, leading to an elaborate musical fantasy sequence. Lois demands Peter teach Chris lawn maintenance, which somehow spirals into the most disturbing material the show has produced. Peter takes Chris to learn mowing basics, starting at 5 in the morning before roosters wake up. The lesson involves pulling the starter cord, with Peter and Chris making uncomfortable comments about grip changes and familiar motions. Chris watches a YouTube tutorial from Corey, who apparently got recruited by a terrorist organization and now makes instructional videos about creating weapons from kitchen supplies. The show treats this like a logical progression for lifestyle vloggers. Herbert spots Chris mowing and offers $50 weekly to maintain his lawn, inviting Chris to bring his chubby little friend Peter, who appears as a child for reasons the episode never adequately explains. Herbert makes references to paying under the table and creating Fort Dix underneath, which lands exactly as inappropriately as intended. Chris accepts the job, while Peter seems oblivious to every red flag Herbert plants like landmines across the conversation. Brian discovers the Newport social scene filled with wealthy widows and meets Stewie posing as a count. They realize they're both running inheritance scams, deciding to team up since there are plenty of heiresses for both of them. The collaboration leads them to Margaret Woolworth Carrington, followed by approximately 75 additional hyphenated surnames spanning multiple minutes of screen time. The joke involves Brian asking if she's the heir to that fortune, requiring Stewie to repeat the entire absurd name again verbatim. Margaret, known as Pip, represents the ultimate score for con artists, married to a 90-year-old husband clinging to life by a thread. Brian and Stewie position themselves to move in once he dies, schmoozing Margaret at social functions while waiting for nature to take its course. They discover Quagmire already married to Margaret through similar deception, having convinced her he lives with her despite never being present. She's too old to remember if he was there yesterday, accepting his word that he was. Herbert gives Chris and Peter cookies with special grape juice containing pills, though Chris complains his cookie lacks the large pill Herbert usually includes for him specifically. Herbert reveals Peter ate Chris's cookie first, leading to a musical montage about being torn between two lovers. The show plays this for comedy while depicting actual grooming behavior, creating discomfort that transcends typical Family Guy boundary pushing into territory that feels genuinely irresponsible. Quagmire offers Brian and Stewie a deal. Help him wrap up the Margaret situation by taking her skydiving or orchestrating something to overwhelm her elderly heart, and he'll split the estate 3 ways. The proposal involves deliberately causing her death through activities too strenuous for her age. They discover Margaret dead of an apparent heart attack before implementing any plan, with each con artist suspecting the others of murder while denying their own involvement. Peter and Chris fight over who does actual work, while the other enjoys Herbert's company. Their wrestling match escalates with increasingly uncomfortable dialogue about going down and pounding before Herbert reveals his arousal at watching. Chris discovers Peter is his father, breaking whatever reality the episode established about Peter being a child, and they reconcile after the conflict. Herbert runs away to an ice cream truck playing music that attracts children, repeating, "I am Herbert," like a horror movie antagonist. Margaret's estate gets divided between Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire, who celebrate becoming wealthy. The lawyer reveals Margaret died owing $9 million from a disastrous investment in a Mindy Project amusement park, a joke that aged poorly given that show's cancellation. They inherit massive debt rather than fortune. The episode ends revealing Meg orchestrated everything to escape from crushing financial obligations, making this technically a Meg episode despite her barely appearing throughout. The episode explored inheritance fraud while featuring content involving minors that would trigger immediate investigation in any real-world context. Family Guy proved it could make financial crime seem like the responsible plotline compared to whatever happened with Herbert's lawn care service. The show wanted its con artist comedy and its deeply inappropriate Herbert material too, creating something that makes you question why anyone greenlit this particular combination of storylines. Now, let's move on to the next episode, and it has a pretty wild reveal. Brian the Closer. In episode Brian the Closer, Family Guy decided Brian should become a sleazy real estate agent who cons Quagmire into buying a worthless condo, which feels like the show asking what if we made Brian even more insufferable while also destroying his teeth first. The episode proves Family Guy could make predatory sales tactics comedic while featuring extended sequences of animal abuse that qualify as felony-level cruelty in most jurisdictions. The setup begins with Peter finding Brian's old rope toy and deciding he wants it despite having zero interest moments earlier. The obsession escalates immediately, with Peter comparing himself to Gollum from Lord of the Rings while hissing about precious rope and demanding ice cream. Lois warns that the fixation is changing him, but Peter commits fully to obtaining this chew toy through any means necessary. The conflict becomes Peter's sole focus, consuming his thoughts and actions for days. Brian refuses to surrender the rope, leading to an escalating battle. Peter ties the rope to his car bumper while Brian holds the other end in his mouth, creating a tug-of-war scenario involving a moving vehicle. Peter drives forward, dragging Brian across pavement, while Brian refuses to let go. The confrontation reaches its peak when Peter accelerates hard enough to yank Brian's teeth completely out of his mouth, leaving him with a mangled face that the family compares to various animals, specifically asking which one makes the trumpet sound, settling on elephant as the closest match. Lois refuses to spend human money on fixing a deformed animal, leaving Brian to figure out his dental crisis independently. Peter returns the rope toy, admitting it's boring and doesn't do anything, which makes the entire tooth-destroying incident even more pointless than initially established. Brian tells Peter to go to hell, while the family reflects on this being Chris's worst flashback attempt, with everyone agreeing he's simply unprepared for that narrative device. Quagmire finds Brian crying at the bar and offers help despite their mutual hatred. He provides his dentist's contact information, explaining he has an account there because the dentist sells him nitrous oxide at wholesale prices in exchange for Quagmire sleeping with his wife, a transaction that benefits everyone involved according to Quagmire's moral point. Brian accepts the help, while Quagmire warns him never to say his full name that way again, and to keep the assistant's secret. The dentist gives Brian enormous prominent teeth that become his defining feature. The family loves the new look, comparing him to a more handsome Adam Carolla and suggesting he'll attract romantic partners easily. The teeth transform Brian's entire appearance, making him look like a movie star according to Lois. Peter credits this as the best cosmetic surgery in the family since Lois's breast augmentation, which Peter apparently ordered himself by telling the doctor something different than what Lois requested, a confession that raises concerning questions about consent and medical procedures. Brian accidentally sells a house while waiting for an actual real estate agent, impressing the professional with his natural sales ability. The agent offers Brian a job, noting that every divorced mom at his kid's school works in real estate, so Brian can definitely handle it. Brian becomes immediately successful, closing multiple deals weekly through charm and his enhanced smile. He develops a romantic relationship with Kim from marketing, bragging about the conquest before discovering she's his boss's wife, prompting Brian's immediate exit to go sell that problematic condo. The boss challenges Brian to sell an unsellable marina condo that's been on the market for 2 years, promising a partnership if Brian finds a buyer. Brian identifies Quagmire as the perfect target after learning Quagmire received a large aviation bonus and has money to burn. He manufactures urgency by claiming another buyer, specifically a Delta pilot Quagmire hates named Lou Sheridan, is about to purchase the property. Quagmire's competitive nature, combined with Brian's manipulation, leads to an immediate sale without Quagmire ever viewing the actual property. The condo turns out to be a complete disaster, nothing like the promotional video Brian showed. The building looks abandoned, features stains shaped like children on carpets, contains a severed head in the freezer alongside sherbet, because priority, and overlooks a poisoned harbor. Quagmire discovers he has 72 hours to rescind the purchase under state law, rushing to find Brian and cancel the contract. Brian hides in a motel to run out the clock, avoiding all contact until the deadline passes. Quagmire corners Brian at the motel and demands his money back. Brian delivers a fake emotional speech about being a selfish jerk, praising Quagmire as the only person who ever tried being his real friend. He claims shame over his behavior and acknowledges Quagmire's superior character traits: honesty, directness, compassion. The moment seems genuine until Brian's watch beeps, marking exactly 72 hours since closing. Brian reveals the entire apology was theater to run out the clock, telling Quagmire to enjoy his worthless property before leaving triumphantly. The episode explored how success corrupts while featuring graphic animal abuse played for extended laughs. Family Guy proved it could make predatory business practices seem almost reasonable compared to dragging a dog behind a car until his teeth explode from his face. The show wanted its morality tale about greed and its violent slapstick too, creating a story where Brian learns absolutely nothing and Quagmire gets punished for showing compassion to someone who needed help. Now let's move on to the next episode, and it gets chaotic real quick. The 2000-year-old virgin. In episode The 2000-year-old virgin, Family Guy decided Jesus should trick men into letting him sleep with their wives by pretending to be a lonely virgin, which feels like the show asking, what if we took the Christmas spirit and replaced it with systematic infidelity? The episode becomes one of the most religiously controversial half hours the show produced, proving Family Guy could make Jesus Christ a con artist running long-term relationship scams while still positioning everything as a valuable lesson about marriage. The setup begins at the mall, where Peter shops at Tommy Bahama, described as the store for uncles who want to hit on waitresses in a threatening, creepy, joking but not really joking way. A demographic apparently 5 million strong, according to their marketing. Peter spots Jesus working retail, discovering he never left Quahog despite their last encounter ending awkwardly. Jesus admits he felt bad about how things ended and wasn't sure the Griffins wanted to hear from him, which Peter dismisses since he's never been one to hold grudges immediately, followed by a flashback of Peter threatening to murder someone's son over a denied hot tub variance. Jesus lives in a depressing apartment with minimal possessions, explaining he avoids his family during holidays because his father spends Christmas at a Coral Gables timeshare with his girlfriend. The flashback shows God trying to avoid a couple with their adult disabled son Scott, making uncomfortable small talk about testing them while revealing Scott will live to 74. Peter refuses to let Jesus spend his birthday alone eating ramen and watching medical dramas, deciding to throw him the best party ever. The planning process reveals Peter was responsible for Woodstock, which he designed as a festival of muddy anatomy before someone suggested adding music. The guys decide Jesus needs women at his party, asking what type he prefers. Jesus awkwardly describes wanting hot ladies who are horny ones who sex on you and come back to sit on his butt, using terminology that suggests someone whose last relationship predates modern vocabulary. The conversation reveals Jesus is a 2,000-year-old virgin who got friend-zoned by a pros times toot in high school, spending his time telling her she deserved better before dying. Peter abandons party planning entirely, declaring a new mission, helping Jesus lose his virginity immediately. The attempts begin with speed dating, where Jesus tells women he lives everywhere, smokes, wanders, deserts, lecturing people, and serves wine that's actually his blood. Every interaction ends poorly, with one woman calling him offensive after he asks if she's having a Good Friday, a crucifixion joke that lands as badly as expected. Peter tries setting up Jesus on Facebook, closing multiple browser windows from his late-night activities involving point-of-view content, where he pretends it's his anatomy doing the slapping information nobody requested, but everyone now possesses. Lois intervenes, taking Jesus to lunch and explaining he needs to be himself rather than following Peter's terrible advice. She encourages honesty and authenticity, praising his sensitive nature, his sacrifice for humanity's sins, and his nice skin. The conversation gives Jesus confidence, leading him to identify the perfect woman for his first experience, Lois herself. He explains she understands him, and he feels close to her, offering Peter anything in the universe in exchange for permission. Peter requests a Brookstone massage chair, immediately accepting the deal despite this being his wife they're discussing. Peter convinces Lois this would be an honor since Jesus chose her over everyone in the world, listing actresses from family sitcoms of the 90s as alternative options. Lois rationalizes that the Son of God's first time should be special and divine, potentially making this a good deed. Jesus arrives in formal wear for their encounter at the Barrington Hotel, with Peter enjoying his new massage chair at the bar. A stranger reveals Jesus used the same virgin scam on his wife last Christmas, with others confirming similar experiences from previous years. The sad apartment is just storage for cruise ship art purchases, and Jesus runs this con annually. Peter races through snow to stop them, pulling multiple muscles and breaking bones, but refusing to seek medical attention because that's apparently less important than preventing infidelity. He commandeers vehicles from people dealing with their own Jesus-related crises, steals a child's toboggan and possessions, and bursts into the hotel room. Lois reveals nothing happened because their marriage matters too much, though she admits temptation peaked when Jesus put actual strawberries in champagne, apparently the classiest gesture she's ever witnessed. Jesus claims the entire situation was a test about appreciating loved ones and resisting temptation, comparing it to Abraham and Isaac. Peter accepts this explanation, despite it making zero sense given Jesus' established pattern of annual wife seduction schemes. Jesus declares his work complete, adding that he's probably fictional anyway before leaving. The family opens Christmas presents, with Stewie receiving a Joni Mitchell album from Rupert to continue his emotional education, leading to tears while listening to cloud-related lyrics. The episode explored marital fidelity through the lens of Jesus Christ as a serial manipulator who targets married couples during the holiday season. Family Guy proved it could make the Messiah a recurring predator while framing everything as valuable relationship lessons, creating something that offended Christians and atheists equally through its commitment to making everyone uncomfortable about their beliefs and their marriages simultaneously. Now let's move on to the next episode, and this one's pretty wild. Movin' Out, Brian's Song. In episode Movin' Out, Brian's Song, Family Guy decided Brian should move in with Jillian despite having zero interest in commitment, which feels like the show exploring what happens when external pressure forces relationship milestones nobody actually wants. The episode becomes a surprisingly grounded look at cohabitation disasters, proving Family Guy could examine relationship dynamics while featuring a parallel subplot about workplace nepotism and inappropriate manager behavior at a convenience store. The setup begins with Brian dating Jillian, his intellectually limited but physically attractive girlfriend. He gives his Disney on Ice ticket to Peter, claiming Walt Disney's anti-Semitism makes the event problematic, listing Disney, ABC, ESPN, and Touchstone as things to avoid on principle. Peter eagerly accepts, putting on his Donald Duck costume and bonding with Jillian, while Brian enjoys time alone to work on his novel titled Faster Than the Speed of Love. Stewie immediately identifies this as the plot from Iron Eagle, with Brian insisting his version includes gathering World War II pilots and accepting a Japanese helper, which turns out to be one of the sequels. Peter spends significant time with Jillian, developing a friendship while Brian distances himself from relationship obligations. During their conversations, Peter encourages Jillian to demand commitment from Brian, suggesting she lay down an ultimatum, either move in together or end things. This advice creates immediate problems when Jillian confronts Brian about cohabitation. Lois supports the idea, pointing out that if Brian never intends getting serious, he's being unfair to Jillian by wasting her time. Brian reluctantly agrees to move in together to prove Lois wrong about his commitment capabilities. The living situation starts poorly. Brian can't afford rent on his new apartment, struggling financially while pretending everything works perfectly. Stewie discovers Brian's situation and offers to become his roommate, having picked up Chris's paper route for income. The arrangement gives Brian financial stability while creating constant interruptions to his relationship. Stewie bursts in demanding graham crackers during intimate moments, spills beverages under the refrigerator, creating ant-attracting messes, and generally makes privacy impossible. Meanwhile, Meg works at a convenience store managed by Carl, who offers her employment after she alphabetizes all the magazines. She gets Chris hired as well, envisioning them as the best brother-sister team since the Gyllenhaals, who argue over who's more off-putting and less castable in lead roles. Carl promotes Chris to supervisor almost immediately, despite Meg working there longer and having superior organizational skills. The promotion comes from Carl and Chris bonding over discussions of attractive actresses in films, with Carl providing detailed timestamps for specific scenes. The conversations between Carl and Chris grow increasingly inappropriate. Carl discusses Selma Blair and Sarah Michelle Gellar in Cruel Intentions, Jennifer Connelly in Career Opportunities, Elizabeth Shue's scene at 39 minutes 45 seconds into Leaving Las Vegas, and Mary Stuart Masterson's gettable quality. These detailed film discussions create workplace favoritism, with Carl valuing Chris's willingness to engage in these conversations over Meg's actual work performance. When Meg protests her treatment, Carl fires her immediately. Brian's relationship deteriorates under the stress of Stewie's constant presence, and Brian's inability to afford rent independently. During an intimate moment interrupted by Stewie for the final time, Jillian learns that Stewie has been paying Brian's half of the rent. The revelation leads to bigger admissions. Brian never wanted to move in together and only agreed under pressure from Lois. Jillian realizes she's been Brian's guilty burden and ends the relationship immediately, leaving Brian devastated despite his earlier reluctance. Stewie tries cheering Brian up with references to Alex P. Keaton's girlfriend troubles on Family Ties, before adding darkly that Michael J. Fox later developed Parkinson's disease. Brian reframes the breakup as freedom and opportunity, celebrating his independence and lack of attachments. Peter throws Brian a party to meet new women, including Joanna, who tells waffle-themed jokes that land with zero comedic impact. The celebration feels hollow as Brian realizes he actually misses Jillian. Chris negotiates Meg's rehiring by leveraging his relationship with Carl through discussions of Event Horizon and Jack Noseworthy's Exploding Eyes. Carl agrees to rehire Meg just to continue their film conversations, demonstrating how their inappropriate workplace dynamic supersedes actual business decisions. Meg ultimately declines returning, recognizing Carl as a problematic employer despite appreciating Chris standing up for her. The siblings reconcile through Chris's advocacy, even though Meg chooses different employment. Stewie confronts Brian about letting others control his life decisions, letting Peter talk him into moving out, letting Jillian walk away without fighting back. The encouragement prompts Brian to pursue Jillian for reconciliation. He arrives at her apartment declaring his love and admitting his mistake, only to discover she's already met someone new named Adam, who asks about the Oxygen Network and his Moesha viewing schedule. Brian accepts defeat, returning home to acknowledge that moving in together was his fundamental error. The episode explored how external pressure creates relationship failures while examining workplace dynamics built on inappropriate favoritism. Family Guy proved it could make cohabitation disasters relatable, while featuring a convenience store manager whose hiring practices depend entirely on employees' willingness to discuss attractive actresses with specific scene. Timestamps. Creating something that works as both relationship commentary and workplace horror story simultaneously. That's it for today. If you want more videos like these, subscribe to our channel, and I'll see you in the next one.